The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp fields bend space according to precise equations. Transporters convert matter to energy and back again following immutable protocols. Even the Bajoran wormhole, that seemingly magical passage to the Gamma Quadrant, obeys its own consistent rules of subspace topology and Verteron particle interaction. But what happens when something appears that defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation the Federation has developed over centuries of exploration? What happens when a being arrives that exists simultaneously as liquid, solid, consciousness, and something beyond all three? Deep Space Nine had seen miracles and nightmares. The station that had witnessed the Dominion War's bloodiest battles, that served as gateway to prophets who existed outside linear time, that balanced Bajoran faith with Federation science, this place thought it had catalogued every impossibility. It was wrong. Chief Miles O'Brien was halfway through his second Raktajino when the alarm started. Not the proximity alerts that announced arriving ships, or the minor fluctuations that plagued the station's perpetually temperamental Cardassian systems. These were the deep, bone-rattling klaxons reserved for wormhole activity. "Sir, we have a massive subspace distortion forming near the wormhole's event horizon," Lieutenant Nog reported from Ops, his Ferengi ears twitching with the stress of processing impossible readings. "It's not following standard Verteron emergence patterns. Energy signatures are." "Colonel, I don't know what these are." Colonel Kira Neri stood from the commander's chair, her Bajoran pragmatism warring with years of seeing the inexplicable emerge from that celestial phenomenon. On screen. The main viewscreen showed the wormhole blossoming into existence, but wrong. Instead of the familiar blue-white petals of subspace unfolding, the aperture writhed with colors that shouldn't exist in normal spacetime. Violet fractals interwove with impossible geometries, and the sensors screamed warnings about dimensional bleeding. "Something's coming through," Nog said, fingers dancing across his console. "Mass reading is, it keeps changing. 300 kilograms, now 50, now back to 200. Molecular structure is completely unstable." The thing that emerged from the wormhole looked like a child's toy, a perfectly spherical blob of translucent blue, perhaps a meter in diameter, that wobbled and pulsed with its own internal light. It tumbled through space for exactly 2.3 seconds before the station's tractor beam locked on and guided it toward an unused cargo bay on the lower level of the habitat ring. By the time Kira, Odo, and a security team reached Cargo Bay 7, the sphere had changed. It was smaller now, basketball-sized, and instead of floating it rested on the deck plating like any physical object governed by artificial gravity. But the surface moved, not like water or gel, but with purposeful ripples that suggested thought, awareness, consideration. "Life signs?" Kira asked, phaser held loosely but ready. The security officer checked her tricorder 3 times before answering. "Yes. No. Maybe." "Colonel, this thing is registering as alive, but its cellular structure keeps shifting. 1 second it reads as silicon-based, then carbon, then something that doesn't match any known periodic elements." Odo stepped forward, his changeling nature giving him unique insight into fluid entities. "It's observing us. I can feel it." As if responding to his words, the blue sphere began to reshape. It stretched upward, forming a crude humanoid silhouette, 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. The surface remained that same translucent blue, but now features emerged. Eyes that glowed with golden light. A mouth that curved into something approximating a friendly smile. And then it spoke. The voice came not from the forming mouth but from everywhere at once, a telepathic projection that each person in the cargo bay heard in their native language, perfectly accented, with inflections that suggested centuries of diplomatic experience. "Apologies for the dramatic entrance. Dimensional travel is imprecise even under the best circumstances. I am Rimuru Tempest, and I believe I'm quite far from home." The security team raised their phasers. Odo held up a hand, stopping them. "Lower your weapons," he said quietly, never taking his eyes from the blue figure. If it meant harm, we'd already be dead. The entity, Rimuru, solidified further, details sharpening until it resembled a young human male with distinctive pointed ears and hair that defied gravity. The androgynous features and slight build were deliberately non-threatening, Kira realized. This was a chosen form, carefully calculated to appear harmless. "You're a shapeshifter," Odo stated. "Not a question. Among other things." Rimuru's golden eyes focused on Odo with obvious interest. "You are as well. Fascinating. Your molecular structure is entirely different from mine, but the principle is similar. You're not like the others, you're fundamentally fluid, just as I am. How did you get here?" Kira demanded, phaser lowered but still in hand. "The wormhole is a gateway to the Gamma Quadrant, not other dimensions." "Ah. Is that what that magnificent phenomenon is called here?" Rimuru's expression brightened with genuine curiosity. "In my world, we would call it a spatial-temporal corridor, though yours is far more stable than any I've encountered. I was investigating unusual energy fluctuations in my reality when something pulled. The fabric between dimensions tore, and I found myself caught in a current I couldn't resist." Analysis complete, a second voice echoed in their minds, this one distinctly different, feminine, mechanical, analytical. "This universe operates on fundamentally different physical principles. Magical particle density is effectively zero. Energy conversion efficiency reduced to 87.3%. Alternative fuel sources identified, antimatter reactions, exotic radiation, subspace field harmonics. Adaptation protocol initiated." The security team looked around wildly, trying to locate the second speaker. "That," Rimuru said with an apologetic shrug, "is great sage. She's part of me. An analytical intelligence that helps me process information. Don't worry, she's not a separate entity. Think of her as a very advanced internal computer." Kira and Odo exchanged glances. They'd dealt with artificial intelligences, telepaths, and beings of pure energy. But something about this visitor set off every instinct Kira had developed through years of resistance fighting in command. This wasn't just another powerful alien. This was something that could reshape their understanding of reality itself. "You're coming with us to the infirmary," Kira decided. "Dr. Bashir will want to examine you. Then we'll determine what to do with you." "Of course," Rimuru agreed easily. "I understand your caution. In your position, I'd do the same. Though I should mention, I don't have biology in the traditional sense. Your medical equipment may give you very strange readings." As the security team escorted their unusual visitor toward the infirmary, Odo leaned close to Kira. "Colonel, I've spent my entire life as the only changeling in Federation space. I know what it means to be fundamentally different from everyone around you." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Whatever that being is, it's operating on a level we don't understand. The way it analyzed our technology, spoke multiple languages telepathically, mentioned alternative fuel sources within seconds of arrival, that's not just intelligence. That's power constrained by politeness." Kira nodded grimly. "Get word to Starfleet Command. And find out everything you can about dimensional physics. I have a feeling we're going to need it." Behind them, unnoticed by the departing group, a single drop of blue slime remained on the cargo bay floor. It pulsed once, twice, then evaporated into molecular vapor, but not before perfectly analyzing and cataloging the station's hull composition, atmospheric mixture, and the unique energy signature of the nearby wormhole. Rimuru Tempest was many things. Careless was not one of them. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The question wasn't whether Deep Space Nine could contain this visitor. The question was whether they'd even realize they were trying to contain something that had already begun integrating itself into the very fabric of their reality, one molecule at a time. Dr. Julian Bashir had examined countless lifeforms during his tenure on Deep Space Nine. Klingon with redundant organs, Trill symbionts, Jem'Hadar with tetracell-white dependency, even Odo's unique changeling physiology. He prided himself on maintaining professional composure regardless of what arrived in his infirmary. That composure cracked when his medical tricorder registered his patient as simultaneously dead, alive, mineral, organic, and undefined error, recalibrate device. "This is impossible," he muttered, running the scan for the 5th time. "Your cellular structure is rewriting itself faster than my instruments can track. One moment you register as a gelatinous compound similar to certain silicon-based lifeforms from Valera 3, the next you're showing carbon-based amino acid chains, then something that resembles programmed matter but with biological properties." Rimuru sat patiently on the bio-bed, having maintained his humanoid form throughout the examination. "I apologize for the confusion. My body is adaptive by nature. What you're seeing is my cellular structure attempting to stabilize in this universe's different physical constants. The process should complete within a few days." Different physical constants. Bashir set down the tricorder and leaned against his desk, fascination overriding protocol. "You're saying the fundamental laws of physics operate differently where you're from?" "In some ways, yes. My universe has what we call magicules, fundamental particles that allow for what you might term magic, though it's really just a different expression of energy manipulation. This universe appears to lack magicules entirely, which is disorienting." Rimuru's expression showed genuine discomfort for the first time. "It's like suddenly losing one of your senses." "I can still function, but I need to recalibrate how I interact with reality." "Recalibration 23% complete," Great Sage announced. "Conversion protocols established for alternative energy absorption. Ambient radiation from the station's fusion reactors providing adequate substitution. Molecular cohesion stabilizing." Bashir started at the voice, then addressed Rimuru directly. "This Great Sage, you said it's part of you, but it clearly has independent processing. How does that work?" "It's complicated." Rimuru smiled, and something about the expression reminded Bashir of Captain Picard. "Ancient wisdom wearing a young face. Great Sage evolved from a unique skill I acquired. She processes information, analyzes threats, manages my various abilities. We're separate but unified. Does your station have an artificial intelligence called a computer?" "It's similar, except mine is integrated into my consciousness rather than external hardware." Before Bashir could respond, Colonel Kira entered the infirmary with Odo close behind. The changeling's expression was particularly neutral. Which, Bashir had learned, meant he was deeply troubled. "Doctor?" Kira asked. "Physically, he's stable. Or as stable as something that defies biological classification can be. No pathogens, no radiation that would harm the station, no immediate threat that I can detect." Bashir hesitated. "But Colonel, I can't even begin to explain what he is. My medical training is useless here." "Perhaps I can clarify," Rimuru offered. "In my world, I'm what's called a true demon lord. Though the title is misleading. I'm actually a slime who evolved through various means into a higher-tier existence. I can consume and analyze matter, replicate abilities I've encountered, and adapt to almost any environment. I've built a nation called the Rimuru Tempest Federation, where humans, monsters, and other beings coexist peacefully." The room fell silent. "You built a nation," Kira repeated slowly. "A federation." "Yes. It started small, a goblin village I helped protect. But grew into something larger. We operate on principles of mutual benefit, species equality, and protective sovereignty. No one is persecuted for what they are, only held accountable for what they do." Rimuru's voice carried pride tempered with hard-earned wisdom. "It wasn't easy. We fought wars, made difficult compromises, lost people we cared about. But we created something worth protecting. Odo studied Rimuru with new intensity. This federation you built. How did you handle conflicts between species with fundamentally different values? Different biological needs? The founders believed order required control. Your approach sounds idealistic. It is idealistic, Rimuru admitted. It's also pragmatic. I learned early that forced unity breeds resentment. Instead, we established frameworks where differences could coexist. Carnivorous species receive ethically sourced food. Territorial beings get defined boundaries. Species that require specific environments receive them. The key is that everyone has voice, everyone has value, and I enforce that principle absolutely. Through power, Kira said, understanding dawning. You're strong enough that no one can challenge your authority. Initially, yes. But that's not sustainable long-term. Rimuru's expression grew serious. True stability comes when people believe in the system, not when they fear the leader. I'm strong enough to prevent external threats and internal chaos while institutions develop. Eventually, my nation will maintain itself through shared values and mutual interest. I'm working toward making myself obsolete. Bashir found himself leaning forward. That's remarkably similar to Federation philosophy. The Prime Directive exists partially to prevent powerful species from imposing their will on developing cultures, to let them find their own paths. Ah, the Prime Directive. Rimuru's smile turned wry. Colonel Kira mentioned it during our walk here. From what I understand, it's a non-interference policy with pre-warp civilizations. I can see the wisdom, preventing cultural contamination, allowing natural development. But tell me, what happens when you witness genocide? Planetary catastrophe? Do you watch and record while millions die because they haven't invented faster-than-light travel yet? The question hung in the air like a live plasma charge. We've had these debates, Kira said quietly. During the occupation, the Federation maintained diplomatic relations with Cardassia while Bajoran suffered. When I was in the Resistance, I couldn't understand how they could ignore our pleas for help. The Prime Directive protected their moral comfort while my people died. And yet, Odo interjected, without such principles, the Federation would be just another empire imposing its values through force. Where does intervention end? At what point does helping become conquering? Exactly the question that haunts every leader with power. Rimuru stood from the bio-bed, his form completely stabilized now. I don't have a perfect answer. What I do have is a framework: intervene when extinction-level events occur, when genocide threatens, when catastrophic suffering can be prevented without destroying a culture's fundamental identity. Stay out of internal politics, religious developments, natural social evolution. And always, always accept the consequences of intervention. Don't help and disappear. If you change something, own that change and see it through. Bashir noticed Kira and Odo exchanging glances again, the silent communication of officers who'd served together through impossible situations. You said you're far from home, Kira said finally. Can you get back? Analysis incomplete, Great Sage responded. Dimensional rift has closed. Energy signature dispersed. Potential return methods: recreate rift conditions, locate alternative dimensional tear, utilize wormholes' unique properties to access subspace layers. Probability of success without additional data, 12.7%. So you're trapped here. Odo's tone was unreadable. For now. Rimuru didn't seem particularly distressed by this. Which means I need to understand this universe. Its rules, its peoples, its conflicts. I need to learn what I can do here, what I can't, and how to coexist without causing problems. I imagine you have procedures for this. We need to contact Starfleet Command, Kira decided. This is beyond station authority. You're claiming to be a nation builder with reality warping abilities who arrived through our wormhole from another dimension. That requires admirals and probably the Federation Council. I understand. While you make those arrangements, perhaps I could observe your station. I'm genuinely curious about your society, your technology. In my experience, you learn more about a civilization from its daily life than from its official pronouncements. Absolutely not, Odo said flatly. You'll remain in quarters under guard until... Actually, Kira interrupted, surprising everyone including herself, I think that's reasonable. Odo, assign someone to escort him. Let him walk the promenade, see how we operate. If he wanted to cause damage, he could have done it already. And... She looked directly at Rimuru. I want to see what you do when you think no one important is watching. Rimuru's smile was approving. A test. I like you, Colonel. You think like a resistance fighter. Former resistance fighter, Kira corrected. Now I'm a Starfleet officer trying to keep this station running and these people safe. The two aren't as different as you might think, Rimuru said softly. The skills that kept your people alive during occupation, reading threats, building coalitions, making hard choices with limited resources, those are exactly the skills needed for command. Don't let anyone tell you different. After Rimuru left with a security escort, Bashir turned to Kira and Odo. Please tell me you're not actually considering trusting him. I'm not, Kira said. But I am considering the possibility that he's exactly what he claims to be. Someone who built something from nothing, who fought to protect it, and who knows what it means to make impossible choices. Someone like that. She trailed off, staring at the wormhole visible through the infirmary's viewport. Someone like that is either the greatest ally we could ask for or the most dangerous threat we've ever faced. The Prophet sent him, Odo said suddenly. Both Kira and Bashir stared at him. Think about it. The wormhole doesn't just randomly pull beings from other dimensions. The prophets exist outside linear time. They've intervened before when they believed something significant was about to occur. What if they brought Rimuru here deliberately? Kira touched her earring, the symbol of her faith, unconsciously. The emissary would know. I need to contact Captain Sisko. As they dispersed to their respective tasks, none of them noticed the faint blue shimmer that briefly appeared on the infirmary's medical console before vanishing. A single microscopic fragment of Rimuru's essence, left behind during the examination, having absorbed and catalogued every piece of medical data in the station's database. Learning, adapting, preparing. On the promenade, Rimuru walked beside his security escort, a young Bajoran deputy named Shul, and absorbed everything. The Ferengi merchant hawking self-sealing stem bolts. The Klingon warriors drinking blood wine at Quarks. The diverse species coexisting in apparent harmony despite their differences. And everywhere, the quiet hum of technology that achieved through science what his world accomplished through magic. Fascinating, Great Sage observed. This station represents a microcosm of their entire civilization. Multiple species, multiple governments, unified by trade and shared space. No single dominant power imposing will through force. Inefficient in many ways, yet stable. It reminds me of home, Rimuru thought back. Before we became strong enough that no one questioned our authority. When everything was fragile and new and we had to negotiate every conflict. Query, do you intend to return home? Of course. My people need me. Tempest Federation is still young, still vulnerable. But there's something here. Something important. I can feel it the same way I felt the threads of fate before Shizu died, before the demon lords gathered, before everything that shaped me. The prophets Odo mentioned, I think they're real. I think they're watching. And I think they have plans I'm only beginning to understand. A Trill science officer hurried past, arms full of isolinear rods. A group of Bajoran children laughed as they chased each other between shops. An elderly human couple shared a quiet meal at a Replomat station. Ordinary life. Peaceful life. The kind of life Rimuru had fought countless battles to secure for his own people. Deputy Shul, Rimuru said suddenly. Tell me about the war. The one I heard mentioned earlier, the Dominion War. The young Bajoran's expression darkened. It ended 2 years ago. Nearly cost us everything. The Dominion came through the wormhole, your wormhole, and nearly conquered the entire Alpha Quadrant. Billions died. Worlds burned. If the Prophets hadn't intervened at a critical moment, if the Federation and Klingon and Romulans hadn't united, we'd all be under Founder control now. The Founders? Changelings. Like Odo, but twisted. They believe only shapeshifters should rule, that solids, everyone else, are inferior. They created the Dominion to enforce that belief through genetic soldiers and cloned administrators. Peace through domination. So this universe has its own demon lords, Rimuru thought. Its own tyrants who justify cruelty through ideology. Warning, Great Sage announced suddenly. Detecting unusual energy signature. Source. Approximately 30 meters above current position. Observation platform. Nature, artificial intelligence with technological interface. Analyzing, analysis complete. Designation, Odo. He is observing us. Rimuru glanced up casually, as if admiring the station's architecture. Sure enough, Odo stood on an upper-level walkway, changeling eyes fixed on Rimuru with absolute focus. He doesn't trust me, Rimuru noted. Good. He shouldn't. Not yet. Trust was earned through action, not words. Rimuru had learned that lesson in blood and sacrifice. If he wanted these people to accept him, if he wanted to understand this universe and find his way home, he would need to prove himself the way he always had. By protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The question was, would that opportunity come, or would he need to create it? The message reached Luther Sloan while he was reviewing casualty reports from a Breen incursion near the Romulan neutral zone. Section 31 had no official headquarters, no formal chain of command, and technically didn't exist according to Federation records. What it did have was an intelligence network that made the Tal Shir look amateurish and operatives embedded so deeply in Starfleet that even admirals never knew they were being watched. Sloan read the report from Deep Space Nine 3 times, then activated a coded channel to 6 different agents scattered across 4 sectors. We have a situation, he said simply. Something came through the wormhole. Not Dominion. Not anything we've catalogued. It claims to be a nation builder from another dimension with adaptive abilities that make changelings look limited. Colonel Kira has granted it supervised freedom to observe the station. A pause as his agents processed this information. Threat assessment, asked Agent 37, currently operating as a civilian analyst on Earth. Unknown. That's the problem. Sloan brought up the sensor data from DS9, watching the incomprehensible reading scroll past. It calls itself Rimuru Tempest. Appeared friendly, cooperative, even philosophical during initial contact. Discussed building a federation of diverse species, protecting the weak, enforcing peace through overwhelming power constrained by principle. Sounds like every tyrant's justification, another agent observed. Or every successful leader's, Sloan countered. That's why we need more information. I want full surveillance on Deep Space Nine. Everything it does, everyone it talks to, every energy fluctuation when it uses whatever abilities it has. And I want theoretical models on how to contain or neutralize it if necessary. The Dominion War just ended, 37 said quietly. The Federation is exhausted. If this entity represents another existential threat, then we deal with it before it becomes one, Sloan finished. That's what we do. The pretty words and hopeful idealism that Starfleet sells. That's a luxury purchased with our vigilance. We are the ones who make the hard choices so they don't have to. He closed the channel and stared at the fragmentary image of Rimuru Tempest reconstructed from DS9 sensor logs. A blue slime that could become humanoid, that spoke of building nations and protecting the weak, that had power it claimed to constrain through morality. Sloane had heard those promises before. From the founders, who believed their domination was protection. From the Borg, who saw assimilation as improving inferior species. From a dozen other powerful entities who justified atrocity through ideology. The Federation's survival depended on people like him recognizing threats before they metastasized. And something that could reshape matter, speak telepathically, and arrive from other dimensions while casually discussing alternative physics? That was a threat. The only question was how to prove it. 3 decks below Ops, Quark's bar hummed with its usual controlled chaos. The Ferengi proprietor prided himself on reading people. Their desires, their weaknesses, their willingness to part with latinum. Decades of practice had made him an expert in sentient behavior. Which was why he noticed immediately when Rimuru entered with his Bajoran escort. The conversations didn't stop, exactly. But they shifted. Everyone in the bar suddenly became aware of the newcomer, tracking him with peripheral vision while pretending to focus on their drinks or Dabo games. Quark had seen this reaction before. When Odo walked through, when Klingon arrived looking for trouble, when anyone dangerous and unpredictable entered his establishment. Deputy Shul, Quark called out cheerfully, all lobes twitching with opportunity. And guest. Welcome to Quark's, the finest entertainment establishment on the station. What can I get you? Rimuru approached the bar with genuine curiosity, his golden eyes scanning the bottles and exotic drinks with interest. I'm not sure. I don't actually need to eat or drink, but I'm curious about the experience. What would you recommend for someone trying your culture's beverages for the first time? You don't need to eat. Quark's mind raced with possibilities. So you're what, photosynthetic? Energy-based? Something like that. Rimuru smiled. But I can still taste, still enjoy food. I've found that sharing meals is an important part of understanding a culture. In my world, I often hosted diplomatic dinners where different species would share their traditional foods. It built connections that formal negotiations couldn't. Quark's opinion of the visitor shifted incrementally. Anyone who understood that business happened over food and drink was someone worth knowing. Smart. Very smart. He poured a small glass of Aldebaran whiskey, setting it before Rimuru. On the house, for a fellow appreciator of cultural exchange. And since you mentioned diplomacy, I'm Quark. I run this establishment, facilitate trade, and occasionally mediate disputes between parties who'd rather not involve station security. A neutral third party, Rimuru observed, sampling the whiskey with obvious pleasure. That's fascinating. This drink is wonderful, by the way. The burn is invigorating. Analysis complete, Great Sage announced, loud enough that Quark jumped. Ethanol compound with trace elements of tritically derived proteins. Mild intoxicant effects negligible due to current physiology. Flavor profile preserved and catalogued. Recommend replication for diplomatic functions upon return home. Sorry, Rimuru apologized to Quark's startled expression. Great Sage gets enthusiastic about analysis. She's part of my internal systems. Quark recovered quickly, already calculating angles. An AI assistant? Integrated directly into your biology? That's worth latinum, friend. The kind of technology that isn't for sale, Rimuru interrupted gently but firmly. It's not removable or transferable. We're fundamentally connected. Shame. Quark wasn't truly disappointed, he'd expected that answer. So what brings you to my establishment? Besides cultural exchange and excellent whiskey? Observation. Rimuru glanced around the bar, taking in the mixed clientele. Your station is remarkable, Quark. I've been here less than a day and I've seen Bajorans working alongside humans, Ferengi trading with Klingon, species that probably warred with each other a generation ago now sharing space peacefully. How did that happen? What changed? Quark laughed, a sharp sound edged with old bitterness. What changed? The occupation ended. The Federation arrived. The Dominion invaded and suddenly everyone had bigger problems than old grudges. Survival is a powerful motivator for cooperation. But survival isn't the same as harmony, Rimuru countered. I've seen plenty of alliances born from necessity that shattered the moment the threat passed. This feels different. More, genuine. You want the truth? Quark leaned closer, his voice dropping. The station works because everyone here has lost something. The Bajorans lost their freedom for 50 years. The Federation lost thousands of ships in the war. The Klingon lost their honor fighting beside enemies they'd rather have killed. Even the Cardassians lost their empire and their pride. We're all broken pieces that somehow fit together because we understand each other's scars. Rimuru was quiet for a moment, golden eyes distant with memory. I understand that. My nation was built the same way. Goblins who'd been slaughtered by human adventurers. Ogres exiled from their clans. Lizard men whose swamps were destroyed. We came together because we had nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to. And you led them. Quark studied Rimuru with new interest. Built them into a federation. Protected them. I've met plenty of powerful beings, friend. Most of them were either tyrants who demanded worship or distant gods who didn't care about mortals. You don't feel like either. I try not to be. Rimuru's expression turned somber. Power without compassion becomes tyranny. Compassion without power becomes empty sentiment. The balance is difficult. Every day I have to choose whether to intervene or step back, whether to use my strength or let my people solve their own problems. Sometimes I get it wrong. Before Quark could respond, a commotion erupted across the bar. A Nausicaan merchant was shouting at a Bajoran trader, his massive frame looming threateningly over the smaller man. Deputy Shul moved to intervene, but Rimuru placed a gentle hand on his arm. May I? Rimuru asked. Shul hesitated, then nodded. No violence. Of course not. Rimuru crossed to the arguing pair with unhurried calm. The Nausicaan was accusing the Bajoran of selling him defective shield generators. The Bajoran was insisting the merchandise was certified and the Nausicaan had simply installed them incorrectly. Gentlemen, Rimuru said mildly. Perhaps I can help mediate this dispute. The Nausicaan rounded on him, eyes narrowing at the slight figure. This doesn't concern you, little man. Walk away before you get hurt. Threat detected, Great Sage observed. Nausicaan physiology, enhanced musculature, heightened aggression, resistant to pain. Probability of physical confrontation, 67.8%. Recommended response, display of overwhelming force to establish dominance. No, Rimuru thought back. That's the Demon Lord approach. I'm not that person anymore. Not here. Aloud, he said, I understand you're frustrated. You paid good latinum for equipment that failed. That's unacceptable. But consider, if the generators were truly defective, wouldn't other customers have complained? Has anyone else reported problems? The Nausicaan paused, his rage momentarily interrupted by logic. Rimuru pressed the advantage. I'm new to this station, so I have no stake in either of your reputations. Would you allow me to examine the generators? I'm quite good with technology. If they're defective, I'll confirm it and you'll have grounds for a full refund. If they're functional, we'll figure out what went wrong with the installation. Either way, we reach truth without violence. The Bajoran trader looked relieved. The Nausicaan looked suspicious but intrigued. You can really tell, the Nausicaan demanded. Affirmative, Great Sage confirmed. Shield generator technology analysis, 0.3 seconds required for complete diagnostic. She can, Rimuru amended. Give me the technical specifications and I'll have an answer in moments. What followed was a display that made Quark's lobes tingle with possibilities. Rimuru examined the shield generators with a precision that would make Chief O'Brien jealous, his eyes glowing brighter as Great Sage processed the data. Within minutes he'd identified the problem, not defective equipment, but an incompatible power coupling that created feedback in the Nausicaa's ship-specific configuration. Not your fault, Rimuru told the merchant. And not his either. The generators are fine, but your ship's Cressari power systems operate at a different frequency than standard Federation vessels. You need an adapter, which, coincidentally, this gentleman sells. The Bajoran trader's eyes widened. I do. Mark 7 frequency adapters, just came in last week. 30 strips of latinum. 25, the Nausicaan countered automatically, his anger forgotten in the ritual of haggling. 27, and I'll throw in installation instructions. Deal. They shook hands, the crisis averted. The Nausicaan even nodded grudging respect to Rimuru before leaving with his purchase. Quark watched the entire exchange with growing admiration. This visitor had de-escalated a potentially violent situation, diagnosed a technical problem, and facilitated a profitable sale, all without threats, without displays of power, without even raising his voice. You're good, Quark admitted as Rimuru returned to the bar. Really good. Where'd you learn to handle people like that? Practice. Lots of practice. Rimuru accepted a second glass of whiskey. When you're building a nation from scratch, every dispute is a potential disaster. Fights between species who don't understand each other. Cultural misunderstandings that escalate to violence. Economic tensions that threaten stability. I learned early that most conflicts aren't about the stated issue, they're about fear, pride, or feeling unheard. Address those underlying needs and the surface problem often resolves itself. Incoming transmission, Great Sage announced. Source, Station Ops. Colonel Kira requests your presence. Starfleet Command has responded to her report. Admiral Ross wishes to speak with you directly. Rimuru sighed, setting down his glass. Duty calls. Thank you for the whiskey, Quark. And for the conversation. I have a feeling I'll be spending more time in your establishment. Always happy to serve a paying customer, Quark said automatically. Then, with uncharacteristic sincerity. Be careful with Starfleet Command, friend. They're good people, mostly. But bureaucracies don't like things they can't categorize. And you are definitely uncategorizable. I'll keep that in mind. As Rimuru left with Deputy Shul, Quark poured himself a drink and contemplated what he'd witnessed. In his experience, powerful beings came in two varieties, those who flaunted their power to intimidate, and those who hid it while plotting. Rimuru seemed to be neither, someone genuinely trying to help, to connect, to understand. Which either made him the most naive entity Quark had ever met, or the most dangerous. Across the station, Odo watched the security footage of the bar incident with troubled eyes. He'd seen Rimuru's technical analysis, witnessed the casual competence with which he'd resolved the dispute. But what disturbed him most was the Nausicaa's final expression, not just respect, but something approaching trust. Rimuru Tempest had been on the station for less than 12 hours and was already building a constituency. People were talking about him, curious about him, beginning to like him. That kind of charisma, combined with that kind of power, had toppled governments and started religions. Odo touched his comm badge. Odo to Colonel Kira. Go ahead. When Admiral Ross speaks with our guest, I recommend extreme caution. Whatever Rimuru Tempest is, he's very good at making people want to trust him. That could be genuine integrity, or it could be the most sophisticated manipulation I've ever encountered. We won't know which until he's faced with a choice between his principles and his self-interest. Agreed, Kira replied. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. In his quarters, Rimuru stood before the viewport, staring at the wormhole's distant glow. Great Sage was cataloging everything they'd learned, station layout, technology specifications, political tensions, cultural dynamics. But Rimuru's thoughts were elsewhere. This universe is wounded, he reflected. The war they mentioned, the Dominion threat, these people have been through hell and are still trying to rebuild. They're fragile. Vulnerable. The kind of situation where one wrong move could shatter everything they've fought to preserve. Query, do you intend to intervene? I don't know yet. That's the problem with power, Sage. Once people know you have it, they expect you to use it. Either to help them or hurt them, depending on their perspective. Neutrality becomes impossible. Additional query, the wormhole. I have been analyzing its properties continuously since arrival. The energy signature is unlike anything in our dimensional framework. The entities Odo mentioned, the prophets, I believe they are observing us even now. Rimuru felt it too. A presence, vast and strange, existing outside the normal flow of causality. Watching. Waiting. Judging. Why did they bring me here? He wondered. What do they want me to see? What choice are they preparing me to make? The answer, he suspected, would reveal itself soon enough. And when it did, it would change everything. The wormhole opened like a celestial flower, its blue-white petals unfolding across space-time in patterns that defied Euclidean geometry. Rimuru stood in the observation lounge, watching the phenomenon with an intensity that made Deputy Shul uncomfortable. It's beautiful, Rimuru said softly. In my world, we have spatial corridors, but nothing like this. This is, alive, somehow. Conscious. The prophets, Shul confirmed, his voice carrying the reverence of a believer. They exist within the wormhole, outside linear time. Past, present, and future are all one to them. They've guided Bajorans for millennia through the orbs, artifacts they sent to teach us, to prepare us. Fascinating, Great Sage observed. Energy readings indicate nonlinear temporal properties. The structure exists simultaneously across multiple time coordinates. Entities within would perceive all moments as concurrent. From their perspective, your arrival, this conversation, and your eventual departure already exist as a single unified event. They already know how this ends, Rimuru said, understanding dawning. They knew before I arrived. Before the dimensional rift even opened. If Odo's theory is correct and they brought me here deliberately. Then they have a purpose for you, Shul finished. The prophets don't act without reason. When the emissary, Captain Sisko, first came to Bajorans, they tested him. Made him confront his past, his pain. Only after he accepted his role did they reveal their guidance. Rimuru's golden eyes glowed brighter. I want to meet them. You can't just demand an audience with the prophets. Shul looked genuinely shocked. The wormhole is sacred. Only the emissary can communicate with them freely, and even then, it's on their terms, not his. I'm not demanding anything. I'm asking. Rimuru turned to face the young deputy. You said they test those they contact. They challenge them to understand themselves. Well, I have questions. About why I'm here. About what they want. About whether my arrival was accident or design. The only way to get answers is to ask directly. Warning, Great Sage interjected. Approaching the wormhole without authorization will provoke station security response. Colonel Kira has been clear about maintaining diplomatic protocols. Then I'll request authorization. Rimuru touched the communication panel. Rimuru Tempest to Ops. Colonel Kira, I'd like to request permission to approach the wormhole. I believe the prophets may have information about my arrival. There was a long pause before Kira's voice responded, carefully controlled. Stand by. In Ops, Kira exchanged glances with Odo and Nog. The request was unprecedented, audacious, and potentially disastrous. But something in Rimuru's tone suggested this wasn't mere curiosity. He's been staring at the wormhole for 20 minutes, Nog reported from his sensor console. His energy signature keeps fluctuating, like he's resonating with its emissions. The prophets rarely communicate with anyone except the emissary, Odo noted. If Rimuru approaches and they respond, it confirms his arrival wasn't random. If they don't, then we've just let a potentially hostile entity near the most strategically important location in the quadrant, Kira finished. She touched her earring again, a habit when facing impossible decisions. But if the prophets did bring him here, refusing his request could offend them. The prophets have their own ways of expressing displeasure. She made her choice. Rimuru Tempest, permission granted. I'm sending a runabout with a pilot. You are not, repeat, not, to enter the wormhole. Approach within 5,000 kilometers and observe. If the prophets wish to communicate, they'll make contact. Understood? Perfectly. Thank you, Colonel. 20 minutes later, Rimuru sat in the Rio Grande's passenger compartment while Lieutenant Commander Jadzia Dax piloted the runabout toward the wormhole. The Trill science officer had volunteered immediately when she'd heard about the request, her joined nature giving her unique appreciation for entities that existed outside normal frameworks. So, Dax said conversationally as they approached the wormhole's coordinates, Great Sage is an integrated AI consciousness, you're a shape-shifting slime from another dimension who built a federation, and you think the prophets pulled you through reality itself. Did I miss anything? Rimuru smiled despite the tension. That's remarkably succinct. You're Trill, correct? I read about your species in the station database. A symbiotic relationship where the symbiont carries memories across multiple hosts. 8 lifetimes so far, Dax confirmed. Which means I've got about 300 years of experience telling me this is either the most amazing opportunity for first contact or the worst idea anyone's had this week. Possibly both. Sensor contact, Great Sage announced. Wormhole opening. Energy signature matches previous observations but with additional harmonic frequencies. Analyzing. Analysis inconclusive. The patterns are deliberately non-random but do not conform to known communication protocols. The wormhole blossomed before them, vast and impossible. But this time, something was different. The usual blue-white radiance had shifted, incorporating threads of gold that pulsed in rhythms that felt almost like language. That's not normal, Dax said quietly, her hands steady on the controls despite her obvious awe. I've been studying this phenomenon for years. I've never seen those color variations. The runabout shuddered as energy washed over it, not hostile, but intensely curious. Rimuru felt the presence he'd sensed earlier suddenly focus on him with overwhelming attention. It was like being examined by a being so vast that his entire existence was a single mode of data in an infinite calculation. And then the voice came. Not through sound, not even through telepathy as Rimuru understood it. This was communication that bypassed sensory organs entirely, inserting meaning directly into consciousness. The Rimuru. The Tempest. The one who consumed the storm and became it. The words echoed across dimensions Rimuru didn't know existed. Dax gasped, her symbiont reacting to the alien presence. Even Great Sage fell silent, her analytical processes temporarily overwhelmed. You know me, Rimuru said aloud, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. You know what I am. Did you bring me here? Here. There. Then. Now. Linear terminology inadequate. The Rimuru exists in this moment because all moments are one. Your arrival was. Your departure will be. Both truths coexist. I don't understand, Rimuru admitted. Are you saying my being here was inevitable? Predetermined? The river flows. The stone diverts. The water continues. Is the stone's presence choice or destiny? The question itself is linear thinking. Rimuru felt Great Sage resuming function, trying desperately to parse the prophet's nonlinear communication into comprehensible framework. It was like trying to translate a symphony into a single sentence, technically possible but fundamentally reductive. Why am I here? Rimuru asked, simplifying his question. What purpose does my presence serve? The coast Emojin stirs. The Pah-Wraiths whisper. The Dominion retreated but seeds remain. The Rimuru who built harmony from chaos, who transformed monsters into people, who chose protection over domination, this Rimuru faces choice. The same choice. Always the same choice. The wormhole's interior suddenly became visible, or rather, a vision of it was projected into Rimuru's consciousness. He saw Captain Benjamin Sisko, the emissary, standing in a place that was simultaneously a baseball field on Earth, the bridge of a starship, and an abstract void of light. He saw Sisko arguing with the prophets about linear existence, about individual choice, about the value of a single life against the needs of billions. He saw the exact moment Sisko chose to exist linearly, to embrace mortality and limitation, to be less than the prophets in order to be more human. You're asking me the same question you asked him, Rimuru realized. Power versus limitation. Transcendence versus connection. Whether it's better to exist outside the struggle or within it. The Sisko chose. The Rimuru will choose. Different beings. Same inflection point. The universe bends around such decisions. I don't want transcendence, Rimuru said firmly. I've been offered godhood before. True demon lord status gave me power beyond mortality, but I stayed connected to my people. I could have become pure consciousness, pure power, but I chose to remain Rimuru. Limited. Mortal in all the ways that matter. Yet the Rimuru contains multitudes. The consumed. The absorbed. The integrated. How many voices speak when the Rimuru speaks? How many souls when the Rimuru acts? The question struck deeper than Rimuru expected. His predator ability had consumed hundreds, no, thousands, of beings over his journey. Their skills, their knowledge, even fragments of their consciousness integrated into his existence. Was he still Satoru Mikami, the human who died and was reborn? Was he Rimuru the slime? Or was he something else entirely, a gestalt entity wearing the mask of individuality? I contain many, Rimuru admitted. But I choose with one voice. My voice. The power comes from all I've absorbed, but the choices are mine alone. That's what makes me me. The answer reveals the question's truth. The Rimuru understands. Now observe. The vision shifted. Rimuru saw Deep Space Nine not as it was now, but as it could be. A version where Section 31's paranoia led them to attack him preemptively, forcing him to defend himself with lethal force. The station damaged. Lives lost. Trust shattered. His path home blocked by Federation hostility and his own guilt. Another vision, Rimuru allied fully with the Bajorans, using his power to accelerate their recovery, to rebuild their world in months instead of years. But in doing so, he robbed them of the struggle that defined them. They became dependent, weak, grateful children instead of sovereign people. The Federation withdrew support, seeing Bajorans as compromised. The Cardassians, sensing weakness, returned. War reignited. A third vision, Rimuru remaining neutral, observing but never acting. Watching as preventable tragedies unfolded, a plague he could cure, a conflict he could mediate, a catastrophe he could avert. Safe in his neutrality, blameless in his inaction, alone in his power. You're showing me the consequences of my choices, Rimuru said. Intervention leads to dependence. Non-intervention leads to preventable suffering. Self-defense leads to escalation. There's no perfect answer. Perfection is linear concept. The prophets do not seek perfection. We seek balance. The Rimuru must find his balance. As the Sisko found his. How? By what principle do I decide when to act and when to refrain? The question each being must answer for themselves. The prophets guided. The Cisco chose. The Rimuru will choose. But know this, the darkness gathering is not of this universe alone. The Pah-Wraiths sense the Rimuru's arrival. They hunger for such power. They will offer. The Rimuru must refuse. Pah-Wraiths. Rimuru felt great sage accessing station databases, pulling information about the prophet's ancient enemies. Beings of chaos and malevolence cast out from the wormhole, imprisoned in the fire caves of Bajorans. Entities who chose domination over guidance. Who saw linear beings as tools, not children. The Coast Emojan, greatest among them, remains imprisoned. But the Rimuru's presence weakens barriers between dimensions. Pathways open. The imprisoned seek freedom. Horror dawned on Rimuru. My arrival created a vulnerability. The dimensional rift that brought me here, it didn't close completely, did it? It left fractures in reality that something could exploit. The Rimuru perceives truth. Your presence is both danger and solution. The choice approaches. The balance must be found. The presence began to withdraw, the golden threads in the wormhole fading back to their normal blue-white radiance. Wait. Rimuru called out. How do I get home? How do I repair the damage my arrival caused? The answers exist within the questions. The Rimuru who built a nation knows, every problem contains its own solution. Every arrival implies a departure. Every opening suggests a closing. Trust the storm that became you. Trust the tempest you became. And then they were gone, leaving only the normal wormhole radiance and a runabout full of stunned silence. Dax was the first to speak, her voice shaking slightly. I've been through that wormhole hundreds of times. I've studied Bajoran theology for years. They've never been that direct with anyone except Cisco. What did they mean about the Pah-Wraiths? About your arrival weakening dimensional barriers? Rimuru stared at the wormhole, his mind racing through implications. They're saying I'm both the problem and the solution. My arrival created a vulnerability that something evil might exploit, but I also have the capability to fix it. The question is how, and at what cost? Analysis of prophet communication, 87% metaphorical, 13% literal predictions, Great Sage reported. However, the warning about dimensional fractures appears substantive. I have detected unusual subspace fluctuations near our arrival coordinates. Microscopic tears in space-time fabric, currently stable but potentially expanding. Can you seal them? Dax asked, already plotting a course back to the station. Unknown. The tiers exist partially outside normal dimensional framework. Conventional Federation technology insufficient. Rimuru's unique properties may allow direct interaction, but risk assessment unclear. Rimuru closed his eyes, thinking. In his world, he'd faced similar problems, spatial distortions, dimensional barriers, tears in reality itself. He'd sealed them using his magic, his understanding of how energy and matter interacted across planes of existence. But here, in a universe without magicules, with different fundamental forces. I need to speak with your engineers, he said finally. Chief O'Brien, right? And anyone with expertise in spatial phenomena. If I'm going to fix this, I need to understand how reality works here. How subspace operates, how transporters manipulate matter, how warp drives compress spacetime. I need to learn your science so I can combine it with my abilities. Dax nodded approvingly. That's a good approach. Miles will love having someone who actually appreciates the technical challenges he deals with daily. But Rimuru. She hesitated. The prophets showed you different possible futures, didn't they? I could see the visions reflected in the wormhole's energy patterns. What did you see? Consequences, Rimuru said simply. Every choice I make here creates ripples. Help too much, and I create dependence. Help too little, and I allow preventable suffering. Defend myself too aggressively, and I become the threat everyone fears. The prophets were right, it's about finding balance. But balance isn't a destination. It's a constant negotiation between conflicting principles. Sounds like command, Dax observed. Welcome to the impossible job of keeping everyone alive while respecting their autonomy. As the runabout turned back toward the station, Rimuru felt the weight of the prophet's message settling over him. They hadn't brought him here to be a weapon or a savior. They'd brought him here because his presence created a crisis that would force choices, his choices, the Federation's choices, choices that would define what kind of universe this became. And somewhere, in the fire caves of Bajorans or in dimensions adjacent to normal reality, the Pah-Wraiths were watching. Waiting. Planning. The storm had arrived. Now came the question of whether it would destroy or protect. The transmission from the Gamma Quadrant arrived 3 days after Rimuru's encounter with the prophets. It was routing through ancient Dominion relays that should have been abandoned, encoded with protocols that predated the war by decades. Colonel Kira read the message twice before calling an emergency briefing. A Vorta ambassador is requesting permission to dock, she announced to the assembled senior staff. Odo, Bashir, Dax, Chief O'Brien, and Nog sat around the wardroom table. Rimuru stood by the viewport, his presence now familiar enough that no one questioned his inclusion in sensitive discussions. His name is Wayown 9. He claims to represent Dominion remnant factions seeking dialogue. Wayown. Odo's voice was sharp. I watched Wayown 7 die on this station. The Founders stopped producing his line after the war ended. Apparently not, Kira said grimly. He specifically requests to meet with the entity from beyond the dimensional barrier. He knows about Rimuru. Every eye in the room turned to their visitor. Rimuru hadn't moved, still gazing at the stars with that unreadable expression he wore when Great Sage was processing complex data. How? O'Brien demanded. We've kept information about Rimuru classified. Starfleet Command, Section 31, and us. Nobody else should know he exists. I may have an explanation, Great Sage said, her voice carrying embarrassment that seemed oddly human. During my initial analysis of the station's systems, I inadvertently sent sensor echoes through the wormhole. A side effect of calibrating to this universe's physics. Any sufficiently advanced monitoring system in the Gamma Quadrant would have detected the anomaly. You announced our presence to the Dominion, Odo stated flatly. Unintentionally. The error has been corrected. However, the damage is done. They know something unusual arrived through the wormhole, and the Vorta are nothing if not opportunistic. Kira rubbed her temples. Recommendations? Refuse the meeting, Odo said immediately. The Dominion cannot be trusted. This is reconnaissance at best, infiltration at worst. Or it's genuine, Rimuru spoke for the first time, turning from the viewport. You said the war ended 2 years ago. The Dominion retreated to the Gamma Quadrant, but they're not destroyed. They're a civilization of trillions spanning hundreds of worlds. What happens to an empire like that when it loses a war? When its leadership structure fractures? Bashir leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. You think they're destabilizing? I think they're adapting. The Founders ruled through genetic control, the Jem'Hadar addicted to white, the Vorta cloned and programmed for loyalty. But addiction can be cured, programming can be questioned, and clones are still sentient beings capable of independent thought. Rimuru's expression was thoughtful. In my world, I saw the demon lords. Beings of immense power who ruled through fear and force. When some of them fell, their territories didn't collapse. They transformed. Sometimes into something better, sometimes into something worse, but always into something different. You're saying we should hear what he has to say, Kira said. I'm saying that refusing dialogue guarantees he remains an enemy. Accepting it gives you information and possibly an opportunity to influence the Dominion's evolution. Rimuru met Kira's eyes. But I understand if you prefer I not attend. This is your station, your decision. I'm still a guest here. Dax smiled slightly. A guest who negotiates disputes in Quark's bar, discusses engineering with Miles, and receives personal audiences with the prophets. You're past being just a guest, Rimuru. The Colonel makes the call, O'Brien said, looking to Kira. But for what it's worth, if the Dominion knows about Rimuru anyway, meeting face-to-face might give us leverage. Let them see what they're dealing with. Kira's jaw tightened. She'd fought the Dominion for years, watched friends die in their war, seen Bajorans threatened by their expansion. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to keep the enemy at arm's length. But she'd also learned from the emissary that sometimes the hardest choices were the right ones. Schedule the meeting, she decided. Ops, neutral ground. Security on standby. Odo, I want you monitoring everything. And Rimuru. She paused. Thank you for offering to step aside, but no. If they want to meet you, they'll meet you on our terms, surrounded by witnesses who'll make sure everyone behaves. Weiao 9 materialized on the transporter pad with the characteristic Vorta smile, obsequious, calculating, and utterly unthreatening in presentation. He wore simple diplomatic robes rather than Dominion military attire, and he came alone. Colonel Kira, he said warmly, as if greeting an old friend rather than a recent enemy. How delightful to see Deep Space Nine thriving. The station looks much better than during our last visit. Save the pleasantries, Kira said coldly. You requested this meeting. State your purpose. Weiao's eyes swept across the assembled group, pausing on Odo with particular interest before settling on Rimuru. His smile widened with genuine fascination. Extraordinary. The sensors didn't do you justice. You're not founder, not changeling, not anything in our genetic databases. Yet you exist, you think, you choose. The founders would find you deeply troubling. He tilted his head. I find you deeply intriguing. I am Rimuru Tempest, Rimuru said evenly. And you are? Weiao. The ninth of my line, though I suspect I may be the last. The founders have withdrawn from active governance since the war ended. They're still revered as gods, of course, but gods who no longer issue commands. It's created something of a power vacuum. Which you're trying to fill, Odo observed. Fill? No, no. I lack both the ambition and the authority. Weiao's tone remained light, but his eyes were sharp. I represent a faction, several factions, actually, who believe the Dominion must change if it's to survive. The war cost us greatly. Fleets destroyed, worlds lost, our reputation as an invincible force shattered. We can rebuild through renewed conquest, which will eventually bring the Federation and its allies down upon us again. Or we can rebuild through adaptation. And what does adaptation look like to the Dominion? Bashir asked, his voice heavy with skepticism. That depends on many factors. Leadership. Resources. Models of governance that prove viable. Weiao turned fully to Rimuru. Which brings me to you, Mr. Tempest. My sources, and yes, I have sources even here in the Alpha Quadrant, indicate you built something called the Rimuru Tempest Federation. A nation comprising multiple species with conflicting needs and natures, united under principles of mutual benefit and protective sovereignty. Is this accurate? It is, Rimuru confirmed. Though I'm curious how you learned that. I've been careful about what information I share. Quark is a wonderful source of gossip, particularly when one offers the right incentives. And you've been quite talkative during your visits to his establishment. Weiao's smile turned sly. You spoke of goblins and ogres, lizardmen and spirits, all coexisting in your nation. You mentioned that you enforce peace not through genetic control or ideological programming, but through overwhelming power constrained by principle. Does that sound familiar, Constable Odo? It should. It's exactly how the founders justified the Dominion's existence. The difference, Odo said icily, is that the founders saw solids as inherently inferior. They created the Dominion to impose order through domination, not cooperation. Precisely. Wei Yan clapped his hands together. The flaw in our system. The founders' prejudice made the Dominion unsustainable. But what if that flaw could be corrected? What if we could create a Dominion based not on founder superiority but on genuine mutual benefit? What if, and please, hear me out, what if we could learn from someone who's already done it? The room fell silent as the implication settled. You want me to help you rebuild the Dominion, Rimuru said quietly. I want you to show us an alternative model. The Rimuru Tempest Federation successfully integrated species that previously warred with each other. You created economic systems that benefited all participants. You established governance that respected diversity while maintaining unity. These are precisely the challenges we face. Wei Yan's expression turned almost desperate. The Dominion contains trillions of beings, Mr. Tempest. Vorta who are beginning to question their programming. Jem'Hadar who've survived long enough without white to realize their addiction was manufactured. Client species who suffered under founder rule but have nowhere else to go. If we collapse into civil war, billions will die. If we continue as we were, we'll eventually face another war with the Federation, one will lose. We need a third option. No, Kira said immediately. Absolutely not. The Dominion nearly destroyed the Alpha Quadrant. You don't get to rehabilitate your image by recruiting a what, Colonel? Wei Yan interrupted gently. A powerful entity from beyond your reality? Someone not bound by your Federation's laws or history. Someone who might actually succeed where your prime directive would prevent any intervention. Rimuru held up a hand before Kira could respond. I appreciate your candor, Wei Yan. But I need to understand something. You say you represent factions seeking change. Who opposes those factions? Because in any power struggle, there are always those who benefit from the status quo. Wei Yan's smile faded slightly. The Jem'Hadar military commanders who see peace as weakness. Vorta loyalists who still worship the founders unconditionally and resist any deviation from traditional doctrine. And, most dangerously, the founders themselves, or at least some of them. They're divided. Some accept that the Dominion must evolve. Others believe our defeat was a temporary setback, that we should consolidate and return stronger than before. Analysis suggests Vorta is being truthful about internal divisions, Great Sage noted. Physiological stress indicators consistent with genuine concern rather than deception. However, his proposal remains strategically advantageous for Dominion interests regardless of sincerity. Why come to me? Rimuru asked. Why not approach the Federation directly? They have diplomatic corps, experience with post-war reconstruction, resources the Dominion needs. Because the Federation's help comes with conditions, Wei Yan said bluntly. Democratic reforms. Transparency. Accountability to external oversight. Things that would trigger immediate civil war among Dominion factions. We're not ready for that level of change. But a neutral third party. Someone who understands the necessity of strong leadership during transitional periods. Someone who's successfully navigated the exact challenges we face. He spread his hands. That's different. That's acceptable to all sides. Odo stepped forward, his expression hard. You're asking Rimuru to legitimize the Dominion. To give them credibility by association. It's brilliant, actually. If he helps you, the Federation can't condemn your reformation efforts without appearing hypocritical. And if he refuses, you can claim the Alpha Quadrant powers prefer endless conflict to genuine peace. Am I really so transparent? Wei Yan sighed theatrically. Yes, Constable, there are strategic benefits to my proposal. But that doesn't make the underlying problem less real. The Dominion is a wounded beast, dangerous precisely because it's injured. Would you prefer we lash out blindly, or would you prefer we have guidance from someone who's already proven they can create stability from chaos? Rimuru walked to the viewport, staring out at the wormhole. Everyone waited, tension thick enough to cut. I built the Tempest Federation from scratch, Rimuru said finally. No existing power structures, no inherited grudges, no generations of programming to overcome. What you're asking, reforming an established empire spanning the Gamma Quadrant. That's exponentially more difficult. Even if I wanted to help, I'm not sure I could. But you're considering it, Weian said. I can see it in your eyes. The same calculation I imagine you made when deciding whether to help that first goblin village. The risk of involvement versus the cost of walking away. The prophets warned me, Rimuru said, more to himself than the others. They said I'd face a choice. The same choice they gave Captain Sisko. Power versus limitation. Transcendence versus connection. Whether to intervene or remain separate. He turned back to face the room. If I help the Dominion, I'm choosing intervention on a massive scale. I'm declaring that I have the right to reshape civilizations because I have the power to do so. That's exactly the kind of thinking that creates tyrants. Or saviors, Weian offered. The difference is whether you help and then leave, or help and then rule. I'm not asking you to govern the Dominion, Mr. Tempest. I'm asking you to consult. To share what you learned. To help us avoid the mistakes you already made so we don't have to learn through blood and fire. And what, Kira demanded, would the Dominion offer in return? Because I guarantee you're not making this proposal out of altruism. Weian's expression turned calculating. Information. The Founders know things about dimensional physics that the Federation doesn't. We've explored sectors of the Gamma Quadrant that contain spatial anomalies similar to the one that brought Mr. Tempest here. We might, and I stress might, be able to help him find a way home. The offer hung in the air like a singularity, warping everything around it. Analysis required, Great Sage said urgently. If the Dominion possesses genuine data on dimensional rifts, combining their knowledge with Federation technology and my own analytical capabilities could exponentially increase the probability of locating a return pathway. Current probability, 12.7%. With Dominion data, potentially 40 to 60%. Rimuru closed his eyes. The prophets had been right. This was the choice. Help an enemy transform and possibly find his way home, or refuse and remain trapped in this universe while the Dominion either collapsed into chaos or rebuilt into a new threat. I need time, he said finally. This isn't a decision I can make in a single conversation. I need to consult with people I trust, consider the implications, understand what I'd actually be agreeing to. Of course, Weian said smoothly. I wouldn't expect anything less. I'll return to my ship and await your answer. But please, don't take too long. The factions I represent are losing influence daily. If we wait too long, the window for peaceful transition will close, and the Dominion will resolve its internal conflicts the way it always has, through violence. After Weian transported away, the wardroom erupted. You can't seriously be considering this, Kira said to Rimuru. The Dominion killed millions. They occupied Bayer's sister station, they nearly conquered the entire quadrant. Helping them is preventing them from doing it again, Rimuru interrupted gently. Colonel, I understand your anger. In your position, I'd feel the same. But consider what happens if I refuse. Is preventing them from doing it again, Rimuru interrupted gently. Colonel, I understand your anger. In your position, I'd feel the same. But consider what happens if I refuse. The Dominion fragments, civil war erupts, and in 20 years a new power emerges from that chaos, possibly worse than what came before. Or they reunify under hardliners who see the Federation as unfinished business. Either way, more death, more destruction, more war. He's not wrong, Dax said reluctantly. The Dominion isn't going to just disappear. The question is what it becomes. O'Brien shook his head. This is above our pay grade. We need to contact Starfleet Command, let them make the call. No, Odo said quietly. Everyone turned to him. Weyoun was right about one thing, the Federation can't make this decision without appearing to have ulterior motives. If Starfleet approves, it looks like political manipulation. If they forbid it, it looks like they prefer an unstable gamma quadrant. This has to be Rimuru's choice, free from our command structure. Rimuru met Odo's eyes, seeing understanding there. You think I should help them? I think, Odo said carefully, that you're the only person I've met who might actually succeed. The Founders ruled through fear masked as benevolence. You rule through actual benevolence backed by the capability for force. The Dominion needs to learn that difference. Whether you're willing to teach them. He shrugged. That's your burden to carry. I'll give you my answer in 3 days, Rimuru told Kira. That's fair. It'll have to be. Kira's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're not making this decision lightly. It shows you understand what's at stake. As the meeting dispersed, Bashir caught up to Rimuru in the corridor. Question, the doctor said. If you do this, if you help the Dominion reform, who does that help more? Them, because they get stability? Or you, because you get your path home? Rimuru smiled sadly. That's the problem, Doctor. I don't know. And I'm terrified that I'm about to make a decision for the wrong reasons and convince myself they're the right ones. Welcome to moral complexity, Bashir said. It's why I became a doctor instead of an admiral. At least in medicine, helping people is always the right answer. Is it? Rimuru's golden eyes glowed in the corridor's dim light. What if helping someone avoid consequences prevents them from learning? What if saving someone's life enables them to harm others? What if the most compassionate choice in the moment creates suffering later? Bashir had no answer. In his quarters that night, Rimuru stood before the viewport and spoke to the prophets, though he didn't know if they could hear. You showed me the consequences of my choices, he said to the stars. But you didn't show me this one. Intervention that might prevent war, or intervention that might enable tyranny. Help that might get me home, or help that might trap me further. How do I know which choice serves balance? No answer came. Only silence, and the weight of a decision that would ripple across 2 quadrants. The message reached Cardassia Prime through encrypted channels that predated the Dominion War. It was brief, direct, and carried the authorization codes of the Datapa Council, the civilian government struggling to rebuild a civilization from ruins. Gul Evek, one of the few Cardassian military officers who'd survived the war with his reputation intact, read the transmission 3 times before believing it. Deep Space Nine. Entity possessing advanced reconstruction capabilities. Federation unwilling to provide direct aid due to political considerations. Alternative approach required. Send representative immediately. Evek stared at the ruined skyline of Cardassia Prime through his office window. Entire cities reduced to rubble by Dominion orbital bombardment in the war's final days, punishment for Cardassia's last-minute betrayal of their former allies. 800 million dead. Infrastructure destroyed. The once proud Cardassian Union reduced to begging for replicator rations from the very people they'd once occupied. Pride demanded he refuse. Pragmatism demanded he investigate. Pragmatism won. Castellan Garrick materialized on Deep Space Nine's transporter pad wearing civilian clothes and his trademark enigmatic smile. The former spy, current Taylor, an unofficial Cardassian representative had requested the meeting through proper diplomatic channels, claiming urgent business with the entity called Rimuru Tempest. Kira met him in the wardroom, her expression professionally neutral despite years of complicated history. Garrick. I should have known you'd find out about Rimuru. My dear Colonel, I'm wounded that you doubt my intelligence-gathering capabilities. Though I confess, most of my information came from Quark, who was quite eager to discuss his fascinating new customer. Garrick settled into a chair with practiced grace. I understand Mr. Tempest is considering a rather ambitious consulting project with the Dominion. I'm here to offer an alternative opportunity. Cardassia wants my help rebuilding, Rimuru said, entering the wardroom with Odo. He'd been expecting this. Great Sage had predicted it with 89% certainty once news of Weyoun's visit became public. You want me to do for you what the Dominion is requesting? Perceptive. Garrick's smile didn't waver. Though our situation is rather different. The Dominion seeks reformation while maintaining its power structure. Cardassia seeks basic survival. We have no ulterior motives because we have no leverage. We're simply desperate. Kira's jaw tightened. The Federation has offered reconstruction aid. Medical supplies, engineering teams, agricultural support. All contingent on democratic reforms, transparency, and war crimes tribunals, Garrick interrupted smoothly. Please understand, Colonel, I don't object to accountability. Those who ordered atrocities should face justice. But the Federation's conditions would take years to implement while my people starve. We need help now, not after we've successfully transformed our entire governmental system to meet your standards. So you want someone who'll help without conditions, Odo said. Someone who won't ask uncomfortable questions about what happened during the occupation. I want someone who understands that morality is a luxury afforded by survival, Garrick corrected. Mr. Tempest built his Federation during times of crisis, yes. I doubt he refused to help goblin children because their parents hadn't implemented democratic elections yet. Rimuru studied Garrick with interest. The Cardassian surface presentation, charming, self-deprecating, harmless, concealed layers of calculation that even Great Sage struggled to parse. This was a man who'd survived decades in the Obsidian Order, Cardassia's brutal intelligence service, and emerged not only alive but influential. What exactly are you asking for? Rimuru asked. Garrick produced a data PADD, sliding it across the table. Infrastructure restoration. Your ability to analyze and replicate matter could rebuild water treatment facilities, power grids, medical centers, the basic necessities destroyed in the final bombardment. No political involvement required. Simply humanitarian assistance that happens to come from someone not bound by Federation regulations. Analysis of provided data, Great Sage reported. Infrastructure damage extensive but not irreparable. Estimated reconstruction time using conventional methods, 15 to 20 years. Using Rimuru's abilities combined with local Cardassian labor and remaining industrial capacity, 18 to 24 months. However, Rimuru continued aloud, helping Cardassia strengthens a former enemy of the Federation and Bajorans. It sends a message that aggression and occupation have no lasting consequences if you lose badly enough to garner sympathy. It also, Garrick said quietly, his smile fading for the first time, prevents radicalization. Do you know what happens to desperate people, Mr. Tempest? They turn to extremists who promise simple solutions. True-way terrorists who believe Cardassia's problems stem from weakness, not atrocity. Nationalist movements calling for a return to military dictatorship. If we don't stabilize quickly, the Cardassia that emerges from this crisis will be far worse than the one that occupied Bajorans. Kira stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the deck. I fought the occupation for years. I watched Cardassians torture my friends, murder my family, enslave my people. And now you want me to support giving them aid while Bajorans is still recovering from what you did to us? No, Garrick said, meeting her eyes. I want you to recognize that punishing all Cardassians for the crimes of their leadership perpetuates the cycle. Bajorans suffered terribly under occupation. I won't insult you by minimizing that. But hundreds of millions of Cardassian civilians just died for their government's crimes. 800 million people who never set foot on Bajorans, who never chose war, who were simply born Cardassian. At what point does punishment become revenge? The silence that followed was broken only by the station's ambient hum. This is exactly what the prophets warned about, Rimuru said finally. Intervention creates ripples. If I help Cardassia, I'm choosing sides in a moral conflict with no clear answer. If I refuse, people die while I maintain my comfortable neutrality. Either way, I'm responsible for the consequences. The difference, Odo observed, is that helping Cardassia doesn't require you to reform their entire governmental system like the Dominion proposal. It's humanitarian aid, not political consultation. Limited scope, defined objectives, clear endpoint. It's also, Kira added bitterly, helping people who destroyed Bajorans rebuild while Bajorans are still struggling. How do I explain that to my people? Garrick leaned forward. Perhaps by reminding them that Bajor's greatest strength has always been its compassion. The prophets teach that all beings are connected, that suffering anywhere diminishes everyone. Bajorans survived the occupation through faith and resilience. Cardassia is learning what occupation feels like, not by conquerors, but by the rubble of our own hubris. Which Bajorans emerges from this crisis, Colonel? The one that responds to suffering with empathy, or the one that responds with the same hardness that brutalized them? Don't you dare, Kira said, her voice shaking with fury, weaponize our faith against us. Don't you dare use the Prophet's teachings to justify erasing accountability for genocide. I'm not asking to erase anything, Garrick said calmly. The trials will happen. The guilty will be judged. Cardassia's crimes are being documented for history. I'm simply asking that while we face our reckoning, we don't allow millions of innocents to die from starvation and disease. Is that really so unconscionable? Rimuru watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't about reconstruction or politics. This was about identity, who Bajorans chose to become in victory, who Cardassia would become in defeat, and what role power played in shaping both. I can't make this decision alone, Rimuru said. Colonel Kira, you have the right to refuse Cardassian aid requests routed through this station. Garrick, you have the right to seek help directly. But if I'm going to involve myself in Alpha Quadrant politics at this level, I need to understand all perspectives. Meaning? Garrick asked. Meaning I need to see Cardassia Prime. See the damage, talk to the survivors, understand what reconstruction actually requires. And I need to visit Bajorans, see what the occupation cost, understand the wounds that haven't healed. Rimuru met Kira's eyes. I won't pretend to be neutral, because I'm not. But I can try to be fair. To see all sides and make the most informed decision possible. Kira's expression was unreadable. Finally, she touched her comm badge. Kira to Ops. Lieutenant Nog, please inform the Bajoran militia liaison that I'm requesting transport to Bajorans. And arrange clearance for a runabout to Cardassia Prime. She looked at Rimuru. You want to understand? Fine. Let me show you what Garrick's people did to mine. The Singar refugee camp sat in the Docker province, housing Bajorans still displaced from their homes by the occupation's scorched earth policies. Rimuru walked through rows of temporary shelters with Kira, seeing families who'd lost everything, children who'd grown up knowing only deprivation. An elderly Bajoran woman approached, her face deeply lined. Colonel Kira. Have you brought aid? This is Rimuru Tempest, Kira introduced. He's a visitor. Learning about Bajorans. The woman studied Rimuru with tired eyes. You're not Starfleet. What are you? Someone trying to understand what happened here, Rimuru said gently. Would you tell me your story? She did. The labor camp where she'd worked processing uridium ore for 16 hours daily. The guards who beat workers for insufficient quotas. The day her husband died in a mining accident and the Cardassians refused to recover his body. The years of hoping the Federation would intervene, then the bitter realization that help wasn't coming. The Cardassians took everything, she said simply. Our resources, our freedom, our dignity. And now I hear their world is suffering. Part of me, the part that remembers my husband's screams, feels glad. But another part. She trailed off, touching her earring. The prophets teach that vengeance brings no peace. I don't know how to reconcile those feelings. Rimuru knelt beside her, his young face grave. In my world, I've met many who suffered like you. Goblins whose villages were destroyed by humans who saw them as monsters. Dwarves whose mountains were seized by greedy kings. What I learned is that survivors carry their pain forever, but they choose what it makes them become. Some let it harden into hate. Others transform it into wisdom. Both responses are valid. Both are human. Which did you choose? The woman asked. Both, at different times. I've taken terrible vengeance on those who hurt my people. I've also shown mercy to former enemies when I believed they could change. The question isn't which choice is right. It's which choice you can live with when you look in the mirror. Later, standing in the ruins of the Galatep labor camp where tens of thousands had died, Kira spoke quietly. This is what Garrick's people did. This is the legacy they're asking us to forgive while they rebuild. Rimuru walked through the memorial, reading names of the dead etched into stone. I'm not asking you to forgive. Forgiveness is personal, earned through genuine remorse and changed behavior. What I'm asking is whether preventing future Cardassian atrocities is served better by helping them stabilize or by letting them collapse into chaos that breeds new extremism. That's cold calculus, Kira said. It's leader's calculus. The kind you make every day as station commander. Rimuru turned to face her. You approved my meeting with Weian even though every instinct told you to refuse, because the strategic benefit outweighed your personal feelings. You're doing it again now, bringing me here even though you prefer I simply say no to Garrick. You're trying to influence my decision, but you're doing it by showing truth rather than manipulation. That takes courage. Kira looked away. I want you to understand the stakes. The Cardassians nearly destroyed us. If we help them recover quickly, we might be enabling the next occupation. Or preventing it. Rimuru placed a hand on one of the memorial stones. The question is whether strength built on resentment is more dangerous than strength built on gratitude. If Cardassia rebuilds alone, they owe nothing to anyone. If they rebuild with help, grudging, conditional help that comes with expectations, they have relationships that constrain future aggression. Cardassia Prime was hell. Rimuru stood in what had been the capital's central district and saw only rubble stretching to the horizon. The Dominion's orbital bombardment had been methodical, targeting population centers with precision designed to maximize casualties. Bodies were still being recovered from the debris. Ghoul Evek met them at the ruined spaceport, his face haggard. Welcome to the price of betrayal. The founders don't appreciate being abandoned mid-war. They toured hospitals overwhelmed with wounded, water treatment facilities destroyed beyond repair, power grids that functioned for hours before failing. Everywhere, Cardassians worked desperately with insufficient tools and dwindling hope. We were an empire, Evek said, staring at a collapsed residential tower. We conquered worlds, occupied civilizations, prided ourselves on our superiority. And now we can't even provide clean water to our capital city. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so devastating. Do you understand why it happened? Rimuru asked. Do Cardassians acknowledge what you did to Bajorans, to the other occupied worlds? Evek was quiet for a long time. Some do. Some refuse to admit our methods were wrong, only that we lost. The divide is tearing us apart politically. The progressives want accountability and reform. The traditionalists want to rebuild strength first, address moral questions later. If we don't stabilize soon, civil war is inevitable. Analysis complete, Great Sage reported. Infrastructure damage assessment confirms Garrick's data. Basic humanitarian intervention could prevent cascading failures leading to societal collapse. However, such intervention would require approximately 60% of Rimuru's current energy capacity for 18 to 24 months, significantly delaying dimensional rift research. There it was. The real cost. Helping Cardassia meant delaying his return home. Possibly by years. Why should I choose Cardassia's survival over finding my way back to my people? Rimuru asked Ivek bluntly. Give me one reason that isn't emotional manipulation. Ivek met his gaze. I can't. From your perspective, we're strangers in a universe you never asked to visit. Our suffering isn't your responsibility, our redemption isn't your obligation. But let me ask you something, the nation you built, the Tempest Federation. Did you create it because it was strategically advantageous, or because you couldn't stand watching preventable suffering? Rimuru didn't answer. On the flight back to Deep Space Nine, he sat in silence while Kira piloted. Finally, she spoke. I can't tell you what to do. I can't even tell you what I think you should do. Part of me wants you to refuse Garrick, to let Cardassia face the consequences of their crimes. Part of me knows that's petty vengeance disguised as justice. She glanced back at him. What did the prophets show you? When you met them in the wormhole? Different possible futures. Ones where I intervened too much, too little, or not at all. None of them were perfect. All of them had consequences I'd have to live with. Sounds like command, Kira said softly. Welcome to the burden of power. Every choice you make, someone suffers. The question is whether you're willing to choose who, or whether you'll let inaction make the choice for you. Rimuru closed his eyes, feeling the weight of two worlds pressing down. The Dominion offering knowledge that might lead him home in exchange for helping reform an empire. Cardassia offering nothing but desperate gratitude in exchange for humanitarian aid that would delay his return. And somewhere, in dimensions he couldn't see, the Pah-Wraiths were watching. Waiting for him to make a choice that would reveal who he truly was, savior or tyrant, helper or conqueror, Rimuru Tempest or something else entirely. 3 days, Weyoun had said. 2 of them were already gone. The call came from Earth at 0300 station time, which meant someone at Starfleet Command considered the matter urgent enough to ignore time zones and diplomatic niceties. Admiral William Ross appeared on the view screen in Kira's office, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he was about to deliver an order no one would like. Colonel Kira. Mr. Tempest. Ross nodded to both of them. I've been reviewing your reports regarding the Vorta ambassador and the Cardassian requests. I've also been reading some, concerning intelligence from our sources. Section 31, Rimuru said flatly. It wasn't a question. Ross's jaw tightened slightly, confirmation enough. There are elements within Starfleet intelligence who believe your presence represents a strategic threat. They're recommending containment protocols. Containment, Odo repeated from his position by the door. That's an interesting euphemism for imprisonment or elimination. I didn't say I agreed with their assessment, Ross said firmly. But I can't ignore it either. Mr. Tempest, you're asking to involve yourself in the political reconstruction of 2 major powers while possessing abilities we don't fully understand. From a security perspective, that's problematic. From a moral perspective, Rimuru countered, refusing to help when I have the capability is problematic. Admiral, I understand your concerns. In your position, I'd have them too. But I'm not asking for Starfleet's permission. I'm informing you of my intentions as a courtesy to people I respect. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ross leaned forward. Let me be extremely clear. The Federation maintains strict protocols regarding external actors influencing member or allied governments. If you proceed with either the Dominion consultation or Cardassian reconstruction without Federation oversight, you'll be operating outside our diplomatic framework. That makes you, at best, a wild card. At worst, a hostile actor. And if I refuse both requests? Rimuru asked. If I maintain the neutrality you're demanding? Then you're a guest on Deep Space Nine, free to continue your research into dimensional physics with Chief O'Brien's assistance. Eventually, you find your way home, we part as friends, and everyone sleeps better knowing an entity of your power level isn't reshaping the political landscape of two quadrants. Kira spoke up, her voice tight with controlled anger. With respect, Admiral, Rimuru has been nothing but cooperative since his arrival. He's helped resolve disputes, shared information freely, and asked for nothing except understanding. This sounds less like security concerns and more like the Federation trying to control something it doesn't understand. That's not fair, Colonel. Isn't it? Kira stood, leaning over her desk. The Federation watched Bajorans suffer for 50 years because the Prime Directive was more important than our freedom. Now you're telling someone who actually wants to help that he shouldn't because it makes you uncomfortable. How is that different? Ross's expression hardened. The Prime Directive exists to prevent powerful civilizations from imposing their will on others, even with good intentions. Mr. Tempest building a nation in another dimension is one thing. Mr. Tempest reshaping the post-war political order here is another entirely. Incoming transmission, Great Sage announced suddenly. Source, unidentified vessel, bearing 347 Mark 12. Romulan energy signature. Message on secure channel specifically requesting Rimuru Tempest. Everyone froze. Romulans? Ross looked genuinely surprised. How did they even know about, never mind. Don't answer that. Colonel, this conversation is far from over. Mr. Tempest, whatever you're planning, think very carefully about the precedent you're setting. The transmission ended. Odo was already at the security console, pulling up sensor data. Romulan warbird, Deredex class. It's maintaining position just outside the sensor net. They must have been listening to our entire conversation. Of course they were, Kira muttered. Because this situation wasn't complicated enough. What do the Romulans want? Analysis suggests reconnaissance and opportunity assessment, Great Sage provided. Romulan Star Empire lost significant territory and resources during Dominion War. Currently in political transition following death of Praetor Nerol. Multiple factions vying for control. Probability they see Rimuru as potential asset or threat, 94.7%. I'll take the call, Rimuru decided. Might as well hear what they have to say. At this point, I'm collecting proposals from everyone except the Borg. Don't give them ideas, Odo said dryly. The view screen activated again, revealing a Romulan woman in commander's uniform. Her features were sharp, calculating, and carried an edge of desperation carefully concealed beneath imperial arrogance. I am Commander Torith of the warbird Kazara. I speak on behalf of certain elements within the Romulan military who believe the Star Empire's future requires alternative approaches. Another faction seeking reformation, Rimuru observed. You've been talking to Wayan. Toritha's expression flickered with surprise before settling back into control. The Vorta ambassador has been remarkably talkative about his encounter with you. He believes you might help the Dominion rebuild. We have a different proposal. I'm listening. The Romulan Star Empire is dying, Torith said bluntly, abandoning pretense. Not from war, but from stagnation. Our government is paralyzed by competing senators and admirals. Our economy depends on conquered territories we can no longer hold. Our people believe in supremacy we can no longer maintain. We need fundamental change, but change initiated from within will trigger civil war. So you want an external catalyst, Kira said. Someone to blame when the necessary reforms prove unpopular. Precisely. Torith smiled without warmth. The Talshir has analyzed your capabilities, Mr. Tempest. You're powerful enough that no faction can eliminate you, but not so overwhelming that you could conquer us. You're foreign enough that working with you doesn't imply weakness, but not so alien that our people would reject you entirely. You're perfect. Perfect for what? Rimuru asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. A demonstration. Something that proves the old ways are obsolete, that adaptation isn't betrayal, that strength can be built through cooperation rather than domination. Torith leaned forward. Help us rebuild one colony, just one. Show the Romulan people what's possible when we stop clinging to empire and start building something sustainable. If it works, reformists gain credibility. If it fails, you take the blame and we continue as before. You're asking me to be a political tool, Rimuru said. I'm asking you to be a teacher, Torith corrected. The same thing Wayan asked, the same thing the Cardassians asked. The difference is that we're being honest about the transactional nature. We'll provide resources, information about dimensional physics from our own research, and access to territories where you can study spatial anomalies. In exchange, you help us prove that change is possible. Odo moved closer to the view screen. Why should we believe anything you're saying? The Romulans are masters of deception. This could be an elaborate trap. It could be, Torith agreed. But consider, if we wanted to capture or eliminate Mr. Tempest, we could have attacked Deep Space Nine directly. The fact that we're talking instead of shooting suggests genuine intent, doesn't it? Or superior planning, Odo retorted. Rimuru held up a hand, forestalling further argument. Commander Torith, I appreciate your directness. But I'm curious, what happens to reformists like you if I refuse? If the Romulan Empire continues on its current path? Toritha's mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine worry. Execution, most likely. The Tal Shir doesn't tolerate dissent, even from military commanders. The faction I represent is small, growing, but vulnerable. We need a success, something visible, to gain momentum. Without it. She shrugged. Without it, we're purged, and the Empire continues its slow decay into irrelevance or violent fragmentation. Assessment. Commander Torith exhibits physiological markers consistent with genuine fear and desperation, Great Sage reported. However, Romulan capacity for controlled deception makes certainty impossible. Recommend extreme caution. I need time, Rimuru said. You're the third major power to approach me in less than a week. Making decisions of this magnitude without proper consideration would be irresponsible. Time is a luxury we don't have, Torith said. But I understand. You have 48 hours before my political position becomes untenable and I'm recalled to Romulus for debriefing. After that, the reformist faction loses its military protection and this opportunity vanishes. The transmission ended. Kira slumped in her chair. 3 major powers. All asking you to help them reform. All offering information about dimensional physics in exchange. All claiming urgent time frames. This can't be coincidence. It's not, Odo said grimly. Someone's orchestrating this. Coordinating the timing to maximize pressure and minimize Rimuru's ability to make informed decisions. The question is who benefits from him committing to any of these proposals. Counter-analysis, Great Sage interjected. Alternative hypothesis, no coordination required. News of Rimuru's arrival has spread through intelligence networks. Multiple powers independently recognizing opportunity and moving simultaneously. Post-war period creates genuine desperation across all major factions. Convergence of requests may be organic rather than orchestrated. Either way, Rimuru said quietly, I'm being pushed toward intervention. Whether by design or circumstance, the result is the same, I choose a side, or I choose inaction. Both are choices with consequences. A calm alert interrupted. Nog's voice came through, sounding urgent. Colonel, we're detecting another vessel approaching. This one's really strange. Define strange, Lieutenant, Kira said warily. It's not registering on conventional sensors. Chief O'Brien had to recalibrate for tachyon emissions just to see it. Whatever it is, it exists partially outside normal spacetime. And ma'am? It's broadcasting a hail specifically for Rimuru Tempest. Rimuru and Kira exchanged glances. Of course it is, she muttered. Put it through. The view screen activated, but instead of showing a ship's bridge or an alien commander, it displayed something impossible. A human figure standing in a void of swirling colors, wearing a Starfleet captain's uniform from a century ago. Hello, Rimuru, Q said with his characteristic smirk. We need to talk about what you're planning to do with my favorite pet humans. Q materialized directly in Ops in a flash of light, bypassing all security protocols and transport restrictions. The Continuum's most notorious member looked around the command center with theatrical disdain. Cardassian architecture. Charming in its brutalist way, though I never understood their aesthetic choices. All those beige tones, so depressing. He turned to Rimuru, studying him with genuine interest. You're the dimensional refugee everyone's so excited about. I have to admit, you're more impressive in person. Most beings from parallel realities are disappointingly mundane, but you've got potential. Kira said, her hand instinctively moving toward her phaser despite knowing it was useless. What do you want? What do I always want? Entertainment, enlightenment, the occasional opportunity to remind lesser beings of their cosmic insignificance. Q waved his hand dismissively. But today, I'm here as something approximating a concerned observer. You see, Rimuru Tempest, you're about to make a decision that will fundamentally alter the trajectory of this quadrant's development. Possibly 2 quadrants. The Continuum finds that intriguing. The Continuum sent you? Rimuru asked, his analytical mind racing through implications. Good grief, no. The Continuum barely notices your little drama. I came of my own volition because I'm bored and you're interesting. Q snapped his fingers, and suddenly they were no longer in Ops but standing in a perfect replica of Rimuru's throne room in Tempest Federation, somehow transported across dimensions and recreated in exact detail. Rimuru barely reacted, his golden eyes narrowing. Impressive. You pulled that from my memories. Memories, dimensional echoes, the fundamental information substrate of reality, take your pick. Q settled into Rimuru's throne with theatrical arrogance. Let's discuss your dilemma. The Dominion wants you to teach them enlightened despotism. The Cardassians want you to rebuild their infrastructure so they can pretend their war crimes have consequences. The Romulans want you to validate their reformation while they continue being magnificently duplicitous. And the Federation wants you to do nothing, thereby maintaining their comfortable moral superiority. You're oversimplifying, Rimuru said. I'm being accurate. You're rationalizing. Q stood, circling Rimuru like a professor examining a particularly promising student. Here's what I find fascinating, you're agonizing over the same question that humanity has struggled with for millennia. When is intervention justified? At what point does helping become controlling? How do you distinguish between compassion and condescension? And you have the answer? Rimuru asked skeptically. I have an answer. Whether it's the answer is up to you. Q snapped his fingers again, and suddenly they were in Galatep labor camp, surrounded by spectral images of Bajoran prisoners suffering under Cardassian guards. The Cardassians caused this. Decades of systematic brutality, cultural genocide, economic exploitation. They deserve punishment, yes. Another snap. Now they stood in the ruins of Cardassia Prime, surrounded by the rubble and the dying. But these people didn't order the occupation. They were simply born Cardassian, raised in a culture that told them conquest was glory. They believed what they were taught. Are they responsible for their ignorance? Another snap. They stood in the wormhole itself, surrounded by the Prophet's nonlinear reality. The beings who exist here see all moments simultaneously. From their perspective, Bayur's suffering, Cardassia's punishment, and the eventual resolution already exist as a unified whole. Cause and effect are illusions of linear thinking. So which moment matters? The crime, the suffering, or the reconciliation that may or may not come? Rimuru felt dizzy, his consciousness struggling to process the rapid shifts in location and context. Great Sage was working frantically to maintain his cognitive stability. "You're trying to convince me there's no right answer," Rimuru said. "I'm trying to convince you that the question itself is flawed." Q snapped once more, returning them to ops where Kira, Odo, and the others stood frozen, trapped in a temporal stasis that left them conscious but unable to move or speak. "You're asking whether you should intervene. That's the wrong question. The right question is, what kind of being do you choose to become? I don't understand the difference." "Then you're not as clever as I thought." Q's expression turned serious, genuinely serious, without a trace of his usual mockery. "The prophets brought you here, yes. They showed you visions of possible futures, warned you about choices. But they left out the most important part. They brought you here because you're at a crossroads in your own evolution." Q gestured, and a vision appeared, Rimuru at the height of his power in his home dimension, surrounded by allies and subjects. "You built a nation through compassion and overwhelming force. You protected the weak by becoming strong enough that no one could threaten them. You created peace by being the most dangerous being in your reality. It worked, temporarily. But what happens when you're gone? When the benevolent tyrant dies or leaves or simply loses interest?" The vision shifted, showing Tempest Federation in turmoil, factions fighting over succession, the careful balance Rimuru maintained collapsing without his presence. "That's not," Rimuru started. "Isn't it?" Q interrupted. "You've made yourself indispensable. Your nation depends on you personally, not on the systems you've built. Remove you from the equation and everything unravels. So you can never leave, never step back, never become anything other than what you are. You've trapped yourself in the role of eternal guardian." The word struck deeper than Rimuru wanted to admit. "The Dominion, Cardassia, the Romulans, they're all offering you the same trap," Q continued. "Become their savior, their teacher, their transformative force. Rebuild them according to your principles, guided by your wisdom. And in doing so, make them dependent on you just like your own nation. Create peace that only exists while you maintain it. What's the alternative?" Rimuru demanded. "Walk away. Let them collapse into chaos and civil war while I maintain my purity through inaction. Now you're getting it." Q clapped his hands together. "That's the real question. Not whether to intervene, but whether you're willing to intervene in a way that makes you obsolete. Can you help people without making them need you? Can you teach principles instead of imposing solutions? Can you build systems that function without your constant presence?" Q snapped his fingers, and suddenly Rimuru saw a different vision, himself working not as a nation builder, but as a consultant in the truest sense. Teaching engineers rather than rebuilding infrastructure. Training diplomats rather than mediating disputes. Sharing principles rather than enforcing outcomes. And then leaving, trusting others to continue the work. "That's terrifying," Rimuru admitted. "What if they fail? What if they take what I teach and use it wrong? What if my leaving causes more harm than my staying would prevent?" "Then they fail," Q said simply. "Then they learn from failure, adapt, try again. That's how species evolve, through struggle, not through being handed solutions by benevolent gods." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "You died once, Rimuru Tempest. You were Satoru Mikami, a human who lived an ordinary life and died an ordinary death. Then you were reborn with extraordinary power. But you're still thinking like someone who believes he can control outcomes through sufficient effort. You can't. Nobody can. Not even the continuum. So what should I do?" Rimuru asked. Whatever you want. That's the glory and terror of free will. Q smiled, but it was a gentler expression than his usual mockery. But if you want my advice. And you probably shouldn't, given my track record, make your choice based on who you want to be, not on the outcomes you think you can guarantee. Because in the end, the only thing you truly control is yourself. Q snapped his fingers one final time, and normal time resumed. Kira stumbled, Odo caught himself against a console, and everyone looked around in confusion. What just happened? Kira demanded. 1 second Q was here, the next. We had a conversation, Rimuru said quietly. About choices and consequences and the difference between helping and controlling. He looked at Q, who stood by the science station examining sensor readouts with theatrical disinterest. Thank you. I think. Don't thank me yet. You haven't made your choice. Rimuru stood before the assembled representatives in Deep Space Nine's largest conference room. Weian 9 sat at the far left, his perpetual smile slightly strained. Commander Torith occupied the right side, her Romulan stoicism barely concealing impatience. Garrick represented Cardassia in the center, looking more genuinely anxious than Rimuru had yet seen him. And via viewscreen from Earth, Admiral Ross observed with the careful neutrality of someone preparing for political fallout. Colonel Kira, Odo, and Dak sat along the back wall as witnesses. The Bajoran colonel's expression was unreadable, but her hand rested near her phaser, not threatening, just prepared. Thank you all for coming, Rimuru began. I've spent the past several days considering your proposals. I've visited worlds, spoken with survivors, consulted with advisors, and even received unsolicited advice from a member of the Q Continuum. I understand what you're asking and why. More importantly, I understand what you're really asking. Weian tilted his head. And what are we really asking, Mr. Tempest? You're asking me to be your shortcut. Your way of bypassing the hard work of genuine transformation by importing someone else's success. Rimuru's golden eyes swept across the room. The Dominion wants to reform without dismantling the power structures that enabled atrocity. Cardassia wants reconstruction without accountability. The Romulans want change without risk. All of you want me to fix problems that took decades or centuries to create, and you want it done quickly, cleanly, and without the messy difficulty of actually changing who you are as civilizations. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. That's not fair, Garrick started. It's completely fair, Rimuru interrupted. And it's understandable. You're desperate, wounded, facing existential crises. Of course you want help. Of course you'd rather have someone powerful solve your problems than struggle through them yourselves. But here's what I learned building the Tempest Federation: sustainable change doesn't come from external saviors. It comes from internal transformation. It's slow, painful, and riddled with setbacks. There are no shortcuts. So you're refusing, Torith said flatly. No. I'm offering an alternative. Rimuru pulled up a holographic display showing a detailed plan. I will help you. But not the way you asked. I won't rebuild Cardassia's infrastructure. I won't consult on Dominion governmental reform. I won't demonstrate alternative models for Romulan colonies. What I will do is teach. He expanded the display, showing a proposed academy structure. I'm establishing an independent institution, not affiliated with any government or faction, where representatives from any civilization can come to learn the principles I applied in building Tempest Federation. Engineering fundamentals. Conflict resolution frameworks. Economic models for diverse species integration. Diplomatic protocols for mutual benefit negotiations. I'll teach what I learned, answer questions, share mistakes I made. But the actual implementation? That's on you. Admiral Ross leaned forward. An academy. Teaching multiple potentially hostile powers advanced techniques simultaneously. That's a security nightmare. It's also transparent, Rimuru countered. Everyone learns the same principles at the same time. No secret deals, no preferential treatment, no accusations of bias. The Federation is welcome to send observers or even students. Knowledge shared equally among all parties. Weiao's expression was calculating. And the location of this academy? Deep Space Nine, Rimuru said, glancing at Kira. If Colonel Kira approves. The station is neutral ground, accessible to all quadrants through the wormhole, and already equipped to handle diverse species requirements. Plus, it sends a message: transformation happens in public, under scrutiny, with accountability. Kira's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Rimuru could see her mind racing through implications. Garrick spoke up, his charm notably absent. Mr. Tempest, I appreciate the pedagogical approach, but my people are starving now. They need infrastructure today, not educational principles they can implement in 5 years. Which is why I'm also proposing a separate humanitarian initiative, Rimuru continued. I will provide direct aid to Cardassia, but administered through a coalition that includes Bajoran oversight. The room erupted. Absolutely not, Garrick started. Out of the question, Kira said simultaneously. Rimuru raised his voice. The Bajorans suffered under Cardassian occupation. They understand deprivation, resource scarcity, and recovery from devastation. They also have a vested interest in ensuring Cardassia doesn't rebuild into a renewed threat. Who better to verify that humanitarian aid is actually going to civilians rather than military reconstruction? Garrick's expression was ice. You're asking us to submit to oversight from people we occupied. That's humiliation. That's accountability, Rimuru said firmly. And it's non-negotiable. If Cardassia wants my help, you accept Bajoran observers who verify aid distribution. You accept transparency. You accept that trust must be earned, not demanded. The Datapa Council will never agree, Garrick said. Then Cardassia rebuilds alone. Rimuru's tone was gentle but inflexible. I'm not interested in enabling pride masquerading as sovereignty. If your people's suffering matters less than avoiding embarrassment, that tells me everything about whether you're actually ready to change. Silence fell. Garrick looked like he'd been struck, his usual composure shattered. Torith spoke into the quiet. And the Romulan proposal? What's our accountability structure? Federation and Klingon monitors, Rimuru said. Your reformation efforts are observed by powers who've historically opposed you. You prove good faith through transparency, not through secret demonstrations on isolated colonies. If you want the galaxy to believe the Romulan Empire can evolve, show them. Publicly. The Tal Shir will execute everyone involved, Torith said. Complete transparency means we can't protect our reformist faction from retaliation. Then you'll need to move faster than the Tal Shir can respond. Or you'll need to convince enough of the military and civilian population that the Reformation is worth protecting. Rimuru met her eyes. I'm not offering you an easy path. I'm offering you a possible one. The difficulty is the point, change that comes easily rarely lasts. Weian had been uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he spoke. This academy model. Students from all factions learning together. You understand that will create connections between traditional enemies. Jem'Hadar soldiers studying alongside Federation officers. Vorta administrators debating Bajoran religious leaders. Romulan military personnel sharing classrooms with Klingon warriors. Yes, Rimuru said simply. That's the goal. In my world, the Tempest Federation's greatest strength wasn't my power, it was the relationships built between species who'd previously been enemies. Goblins learning to trust ogres. Humans working alongside monsters. Those connections became the foundation for lasting peace. Or, Odo interjected, it creates a network of individuals loyal to Rimuru's ideology rather than their own governments. That's nation building under another name. That's a risk, Rimuru admitted. One I've thought about extensively. Which is why I'm setting a time limit. The academy operates for 3 years maximum. After that, I close it and focus exclusively on finding my way home. Whatever transformation happens in that time is what you get. No permanent institution, no ongoing dependency, no eternal guardian. 3 years, Ross said thoughtfully. To fundamentally reshape post-war political dynamics across 2 quadrants. To plant seeds, Rimuru corrected. Whether they grow depends entirely on the students and their civilizations. I'm offering knowledge and frameworks. What you do with them is your choice. Analysis of proposal, Great Sage provided privately. Estimated energy expenditure. 40% of current capacity over 3-year period. Leave sufficient resources for dimensional rift research while providing meaningful assistance. Risk of dependency reduced through time-limited engagement. Potential for cross-cultural connection building, high. Probability of political backlash from conservative factions, 87.9%. Overall assessment, strategically sound but politically volatile. Weyoun stood, his expression more serious than Rimuru had yet seen. I need to consult with my faction. This isn't what we requested, but it's intriguing. The Dominion's greatest weakness has always been isolation, we conquered rather than cooperated. An academy model forces engagement, dialogue, shared learning. It's either brilliant or catastrophically naive. Probably both, Rimuru said. Most good ideas are. Torith rose as well. I'll take your proposal to the Reformist Coalition. But Mr. Tempest, understand. If we accept, we're betting our lives on your ability to create meaningful change in 3 years. The Tal Shir doesn't forgive failure. I understand the stakes. Garrick remained seated, his eyes distant. You're asking Cardassia to accept Bajoran oversight while we rebuild. To admit weakness, to accept supervision from those we victimized. The psychological cost of that. He trailed off, then looked directly at Kira. Colonel, if the Datapa Council agrees, if Bajoran sends observers. What would their mandate be? Humiliation or genuine humanitarian concern? Kira was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured. I can't speak for all Bajorans. Many would prefer Cardassia suffer as we suffered. But the prophets teach that suffering doesn't erase suffering, it only perpetuates cycles of pain. If Bajorans participates in Cardassian reconstruction, our observers would verify that aid reaches those who need it. Not to humiliate, but to ensure that this time, when infrastructure is built, it's built for people, not for conquest. That's acceptable, Garrick said quietly. More than acceptable. It's what we deserve. Admiral Ross's expression was conflicted. Mr. Tempest, I need to consult with the Federation Council. An academy on Deep Space Nine teaching advanced techniques to multiple powers simultaneously raises significant security concerns. And the political ramifications of Bajoran oversight of Cardassian reconstruction, that could destabilize the entire sector if mishandled. I understand, Admiral. But respectfully, I'm not asking for Federation permission. I'm informing you of my intentions and inviting your participation. Rimuru's tone remained polite but firm. If the Federation chooses not to send students or observers, that's your prerogative. But the Academy will proceed regardless. The Admiral's jaw tightened. I'll be in touch. The transmission ended. As the various representatives departed to consult with their governments, Kira pulled Rimuru aside. You just committed Bajorans to overseeing Cardassian reconstruction without asking our government first, she said. That's going to create political chaos on my homeworld. I know. I'm sorry for putting you in that position. Rimuru's expression was genuinely apologetic. But it was the only solution I could find that balanced accountability with compassion. Cardassia needs help or they collapse. But helping them without consequences sends the wrong message. Bajoran oversight provides both. Assistance that prevents catastrophe, accountability that requires humility. And if my government refuses? If they say no, Bajoran will work alongside Cardassians under any circumstances. Then I respect their choice and find another model. Maybe Federation oversight, maybe an independent civilian organization. The specific implementation matters less than the principle, help coupled with accountability, transparency coupled with support. Odo approached, his expression thoughtful. You learned something from Q, didn't you? This academy model, the time limit, the focus on teaching rather than doing, that's not what you were considering 3 days ago. Q showed me possible futures where I became indispensable. Where my help created dependency that trapped both me and those I helped. Rimuru looked out the viewport at the wormhole. I've been that person before, the one who solves every problem, mediates every conflict, makes myself necessary to everyone's survival. It's exhausting, and ultimately, it's selfish. It makes me feel important while preventing others from developing their own capacity. Teaching instead of doing, Dax said, joining the conversation. The Dax symbiont has lived through 8 hosts. I've seen brilliant leaders fall into the trap of believing they're irreplaceable. The best leaders create systems that outlive them. Sounds like you're trying to do that. Trying being the key word. Rimuru smiled wryly. I have no idea if this will work. 3 years might be too short to create meaningful change or too long to avoid creating dependency. The academy model might build bridges between enemies, or it might just give them better tools to fight each other. But at least it's honest. I'm not pretending to be a savior or a neutral observer. I'm someone with knowledge offering to share it, with clear boundaries about what I will and won't do. A calm alert sounded. Nog's voice came through. Colonel, we're detecting unusual readings from the wormhole. It's opening, but not for ship transit. The prophets are. I think they're manifesting something. Everyone rushed to the viewport. The wormhole was behaving unlike anything in the station's records. Instead of opening fully, it pulsed with rhythmic energy, and from its center, a small object emerged, a crystal, roughly the size of a person's fist, that floated toward the station with deliberate purpose. An orb, Kira breathed. The prophets are sending an orb. Energy signature analysis, Great Sage reported. Similar to previously catalogued Bajoran orbs but with additional harmonic frequencies. This artifact is specifically attuned to Rimuru's dimensional variance. Hypothesis: the prophets are providing a tool or message relevant to current situation. The crystal docked itself gently against the station's hull near an airlock. Security teams scrambled to retrieve it while Kira contacted Bajoran religious authorities. 2 hours later, the orb. Identified by Videk Yasim as the Orb of Balance, a prophetic artifact whose existence was theorized but never confirmed, sat in a specially prepared chamber. Rimuru stood before it, feeling the pull of nonlinear consciousness that had spoken to him in the wormhole. The prophets are responding to your decision, Kira said softly. She stood beside him, along with Odo and Dax. The Orb of Balance appears only when someone stands at a crucial junction between opposing forces. It shows the consequences of maintaining or disrupting equilibrium. May I? Rimuru asked. Kira nodded. The orbs choose who experiences them. If it's here, it's meant for you. Rimuru reached out, his hand touching the crystal's surface. Reality fractured. He saw the academy in operation, students from a dozen species debating, learning, challenging each other's assumptions. A Jem'Hadar soldier discovering philosophy through Vulcan logic. A Romulan officer laughing genuine laughter with a Bajoran engineer. A Cardassian administrator learning resource distribution from Federation experts while Klingon observers ensured fair treatment. He saw connections forming, ideas spreading, perspectives shifting. The academy wasn't just teaching techniques, it was creating relationships that would outlast any government's policies. But he also saw the resistance. Hardliners in every civilization viewing the academy as contamination. Section 31 plotting to infiltrate it. The Tal Shir attempting assassinations. Conservative Cardassian factions sabotaging cooperation. And everywhere, the fear that change meant losing identity, that evolution meant betrayal of tradition. The vision shifted, showing him two paths. In the first, he remained at the academy beyond 3 years, becoming the permanent arbiter, the indispensable mediator. The relationships deepened, the peace held, but only because he was there to enforce it. He never went home. Never saw Tempest Federation again. Became the eternal guardian of a peace that couldn't exist without him. In the second path, he left after 3 years as promised. Some of what he'd built survived. Some collapsed. There were setbacks, conflicts, misunderstandings. But those who remained, the students, the believers, the ones who genuinely internalized the principles, they continued the work. Imperfectly. Haltingly. But authentically, driven by their own conviction rather than his presence. The balance, the prophets spoke. The Rimuru sees. Perfection through control. Or growth through struggle. Which serves the greater becoming? Neither path guarantees success, Rimuru said to the vision. Both have risks. All moments contain risk. The question is not success. The question is growth. Will the civilizations grow because of you? Or despite you? The vision faded. Rimuru stood again in the orb chamber, tears streaming down his face from the intensity of the experience. What did you see? Kira asked gently. The difference between being a savior and being a teacher, Rimuru said. And why one of those paths leads to dependency while the other leads to genuine transformation. He turned to face his friends, and somewhere along the way, they had become friends. Kira with her fierce integrity. Odo with his outsider's wisdom. Dax with her centuries of perspective. I'm doing this. The academy, the time limit, all of it. And when 3 years are up, I'm leaving. Even if the work isn't finished. Even if people are begging me to stay. Because the prophets are right, lasting change doesn't come from external guardians. It comes from internal transformation, no matter how messy and imperfect. Then we'd better make those 3 years count, Kira said. She extended her hand. As a Bajoran and as a Starfleet officer, I support your plan. I'll talk to my government about observer roles. I'll help you establish the academy. And when it's time for you to go home, I'll make sure everyone remembers why you left, not because you abandoned us, but because you trusted us to continue without you. Rimuru took her hand, feeling the weight of commitment settle over him. The storm had chosen its path. Now came the work of proving it was the right one. The Tempest Academy opened 6 weeks later in a repurposed section of Deep Space Nine's habitat ring. The space had previously served as emergency refugee housing during the Dominion War, fitting, given that those who came to learn were themselves refugees of a sort, displaced from certainty into the uncomfortable territory of necessary change. Rimuru stood before the first class of 47 students and felt the weight of impossible expectations. Jem'Hadar soldiers sat rigidly in the front row, their genetic programming warring with curiosity. Behind them, Romulan military officers maintained careful distance from both the Klingon warriors and the Federation Starfleet personnel. Cardassian civilians clustered together defensively. Bajoran observers watched from the sides, their presence a constant reminder of accountability. Even a Vorta administrator attended, though Weyoun himself had been recalled to the Gamma Quadrant 4 consultation with founder representatives. You're here, Rimuru began, because your civilizations are broken. Not damaged, broken. The Dominion lost a war it thought it couldn't lose. The Romulan Empire is fragmenting under the weight of its own contradictions. Cardassia was nearly obliterated by its own allies. And the Federation, He glanced at the Starfleet officers. The Federation is exhausted from maintaining ideals in a galaxy that constantly tests whether those ideals can survive contact with reality. A Cardassian civilian, a woman named Ethka who'd lost her entire family in the Dominion bombardment, raised her hand. "You're saying we're all failures." "I'm saying you're all survivors of systems that failed you," Rimuru corrected. "There's a difference. Failure creates opportunity for change. The question is whether you'll use that opportunity or waste it defending the mistakes that brought you here." A Jem'Hadar, one of the rare few who'd survived long enough without White to begin thinking independently, spoke in the clipped tones of military conditioning. "The Founders' system did not fail. We failed the Founders through insufficient loyalty." "Did you?" Rimuru challenged. "Or did the Founders fail you by creating a system that required genetic slavery to function? By making you dependent on a substance that exists solely to control you? By telling you that your lives only had value as tools of conquest?" The Jem'Hadar's eyes widened, a microscopic crack in his conditioning. A Romulan centurion, Commander Tomalak, stood. "You speak of broken systems, Mr. Tempest. Yet you built a nation through overwhelming personal power. How is that different from the Founders' domination or the Romulan Senate's authoritarianism?" "Because I designed myself to become obsolete," Rimuru said. "In Tempest Federation, I established councils, trained administrators, created economic systems that functioned independently of my direct involvement. My power provided stability during the transition from chaos to order, but the goal was always to make that power unnecessary. Can any of your civilizations say the same? Have your leaders ever worked toward making themselves unnecessary?" Silence answered him. "That's what we're here to change," Rimuru continued. "Over the next 3 years, you'll learn principles, not solutions. Frameworks, not answers. I'm going to teach you how to think about problems rather than what to think about them. And it's going to be frustrating, because humans, and I use that term broadly to include all sentient species, want certainty. You want to be told, do this and everything will be fine. But that's not how sustainable change works." He activated a holographic display showing Tempest Federation's developmental timeline. "When I first became involved with the goblins who would form the core of my nation, they were facing extinction. Human adventurers had slaughtered their warriors. They had no food, no defenses, no hope. The easy solution would have been for me to simply destroy the threats and provide resources indefinitely. Instead, I taught them to fight. I helped them establish trade with other species. I mediated their conflicts but didn't solve them. And yes, people died during that process. Mistakes were made. Preventable tragedies occurred." A Bajoran observer, Videk Yasim, spoke up. "You're saying that suffering is necessary for growth?" "I'm saying that shielding people from all consequences prevents them from developing capacity to handle challenges themselves," Rimuru clarified. "There's a difference between letting someone struggle with a difficult problem and letting them face extinction. The former builds strength. The latter is cruelty disguised as non-interference." "The Prime Directive," a Starfleet lieutenant began. "Is a principle, not a law of physics," Rimuru interrupted. "And like all principles, it requires interpretation based on context. That's what we're going to explore, how to make ethical decisions in situations where all available options cause some degree of harm." He pulled up case studies from his own experience. The time he'd allowed a goblin settlement to face a direwolf pack alone despite knowing casualties would occur. The diplomatic crisis when ogres and lizard men nearly went to war over territorial boundaries. The economic collapse when he'd refused to simply replicate unlimited resources, forcing his people to develop sustainable trade systems. Every one of these situations had a simple solution, me, Rimuru said. I could have killed the wolves, dictated the territorial boundaries, provided infinite resources. Instead, I provided frameworks, mediated rather than dictated, and allowed people to make mistakes and learn from them. The result was a nation that could function without me. Imperfectly. Inefficiently. But genuinely. A Klingon warrior, Martok's cousin Ken, laughed roughly. You speak of allowing struggle as if it's noble. In Klingon culture, we call that weakness. The strong survive. The weak perish. That is natural order. And yet the Klingon Empire allied with the Federation to survive the Dominion War, Rimuru observed. You set aside pride and independence because collective strength defeated individual glory. Was that weakness? Or was it adaptation? Ken's expression darkened, but he didn't respond. The first session lasted 4 hours. They covered basic frameworks for multi-species cooperation, resource allocation models that accounted for different biological needs, and conflict resolution protocols that respected cultural differences while establishing common ground. By the end, everyone looked exhausted. Tomorrow, Rimuru announced, we begin practical exercises. You'll be divided into mixed groups. Dominion with Federation, Romulan with Klingon, Cardassian with Bajoran. You'll face simulated crisis scenarios requiring cooperation between traditional enemies. You'll fail repeatedly. You'll argue. You'll want to quit. That's when the actual learning begins. As students dispersed, several remained behind with questions. The Jem'Hadar soldier approached hesitantly. The White, he said quietly. You mentioned independence from it. Is that possible? Analysis of Jem'Hadar physiology, Great Sage provided. Ketracell White dependency is genetic but not absolute. Prolonged survival without the substance triggers adaptive mutations. This individual shows early-stage adaptation. Complete independence achievable with proper medical support and gradual weaning protocol. It's possible, Rimuru confirmed. Dr. Bashir on this station has been researching Jem'Hadar biology. If you're willing to undergo treatment, we can work toward freeing you from that dependency. But understand, it won't be easy, and your Vorta overseers would see it as betrayal. I am already betraying them by being here, the soldier said. By questioning. By thinking. If I am to be executed for treason, I would prefer to die free of their control. What's your name? Rimuru asked. Designation, Gamma 7-3. Your name, Rimuru repeated. Not your designation. If you're going to be free, you need an identity beyond what they programmed into you. The Jem'Hadar was silent for a long moment. Finally, Kidna Clan. A warrior from historical records who chose honor over obedience. If I am to betray my purpose, I will take his name as reminder of what that choice costs. Kidna Clan, Rimuru acknowledged. I'll arrange for you to work with Dr. Bashir. The process will take months, possibly years. But if you're committed, we'll help you achieve independence. After Kidna Clan left, Commander Tomalak approached. The Romulan's expression was calculating. You're creating a revolution, he said bluntly. Teaching Jem'Hadar to break their conditioning, encouraging Cardassians to accept oversight from their victims, asking Romulans to abandon secrecy. Do you understand the political chaos this will cause? Yes, Rimuru said simply. That's why it matters. Stable oppression isn't peace, it's just slow-motion violence. If chaos is necessary to break unjust systems, then chaos is what we create. But we create it intentionally, with support structures in place to prevent it from becoming destructive. And if your support structures fail? If the chaos you unleash tears civilizations apart? Then I'll have made a catastrophic mistake and will have to live with the consequences, Rimuru admitted. But the alternative is doing nothing while existing systems grind billions of lives into meaningless suffering. I'd rather fail trying to create something better than succeed at maintaining something broken. Tomalak studied him with new intensity. You actually believe that? You're not posturing or manipulating. You genuinely think this academy can change the political landscape of 2 quadrants? I think it can plant seeds, Rimuru corrected. Whether those seeds grow depends entirely on people like you. On whether you choose to nurture them or uproot them when you return to your respective governments. 3 months into the Academy's operation, Section 31 made its move. The attempt was subtle. A student who seemed to be a low-level Romulan technician but whose biometric data didn't quite match Romulan baselines. Great Sage identified the discrepancy within hours of the infiltrator's arrival. Surgical alterations detected, she reported privately to Rimuru. Subject is human, genetically modified to appear Romulan. Neural implants suggest intelligence training. Probability this individual is Section 31 operative, 94.3%. Recommended action, expose and remove. No, Rimuru thought back. Let them observe. Let them report back exactly what we're doing here. Secrecy breeds paranoia. Transparency builds trust, or at least makes the paranoid look foolish. Risk assessment, high. Section 31 could use gathered intelligence to sabotage Academy or plan targeted elimination of key students. Then we make sure there's nothing to sabotage except honest education. And if they try elimination, we respond decisively. The infiltrator. Calling herself Subcommander Tren, participated in classes with apparent sincerity. She asked pointed questions about defensive capabilities, resource allocation during crises, and strategic planning frameworks. Everything she learned went into detailed reports transmitted through encrypted channels. Rimuru let it happen, but he wasn't naive. Odo's security team monitored every transmission, cataloging Section 31's interests and concerns. When they finally moved against the Academy, Deep Space Nine would be prepared. The attack came during a practical exercise in the 4th month. Students had been divided into mixed teams and given a scenario: negotiate resource sharing during a famine affecting multiple species with incompatible dietary needs. The Cardassian Bajoran team was making surprising progress, developing innovative solutions that acknowledged past grievances while focusing on current survival. Then the power failed. Emergency lighting activated as station-wide systems went offline. But this wasn't a simple malfunction. Targeted systems crashed while others functioned normally. Life support remained stable, but communications, sensors, and transporters all failed simultaneously. Cyber attack, Great Sage reported. Malicious code introduced through Academy network connection. Sophisticated, multi-layered, designed to appear as catastrophic system failure. Tracing origin identified, Section 31 protocols. Lock down the Academy section, Rimuru ordered aloud, his voice carrying authority that made students snap to attention. Nobody leaves until we assess the situation. But the attack's real purpose became clear when a message appeared on every display screen in the Academy. Attention Deep Space Nine, the entity known as Rimuru Tempest represents an existential threat to Federation security. His Academy trains potential enemies in advanced techniques while creating loyalties that supersede governmental authority. We are taking action to neutralize this threat before it metastasizes. Evacuation protocols have been disabled. You have 30 minutes to surrender Rimuru Tempest or the Academy section will be vented to space. Section 31-inch. The room erupted in chaos. They're bluffing, Odo's voice came through emergency comm systems. Section 31 operates in shadows. They don't make public ultimatums. Unless, Daxa's voice added, they want to create a crisis that forces Starfleet Command to take action. If we evacuate the Academy under threat, it proves Section 31's point that Rimuru is dangerous. If we don't, and they follow through, he's responsible for student deaths. Rimuru felt 47 pairs of eyes turn to him. Fear, anger, confusion, and, surprisingly, defiance. Kidnaklan stood, his Jem'Hadar physiology imposing despite his deteriorating condition from white withdrawal. I did not achieve independence from Vorta control to die because human spies fear education. We fight. Agreed, Khan said, hand moving to where his DK Tog would normally rest. This is without honor. Section 31 are PTQ who strike from shadows. Even Commander Tomalak, the skeptical Romulan, nodded. I suspected infiltration. I did not anticipate this level of desperation. The Federation's shadow operatives must truly fear what we're learning here. The Cardassian woman, Ethka, spoke quietly. During the occupation, the Obsidian Order used similar tactics. Create impossible choices, then blame victims for consequences. I survived by refusing to play their game. So we refuse, Rimuru said, his mind racing through options. Great Sage, can you counter their malicious code? Already in progress. However, Section 31 systems are highly adaptive. Full restoration will require 17 minutes. They specified 30, suggesting they anticipated resistance and calculated precise timing. Chief O'Brien. Rimuru called through the comm. The engineer's voice came through, strained but determined. I'm locked out of primary systems, but I'm rerouting through secondary processors. Give me 15 minutes and I'll have manual control of critical systems. They can't vent the Academy if I physically prevent the hatches from opening. Do it. Odo, can you identify the infiltrator? Already done, the changeling replied. Subcommander Tren just tried to access a secure comm channel. She's currently in my security office, very surprised to find herself in a holding cell. Rimuru smiled grimly. Good. Now comes the hard part, we need to send a message that makes Section 31 realize they've miscalculated. He turned to the students. I need volunteers. What we're about to do is dangerous and will make you targets. Section 31 will know your names, your faces, your governments. They'll attempt retribution. If you'd rather evacuate to a safer location, I understand completely. Not one person moved toward the exits. Right then, Rimuru said. Let's show them what happens when they threaten students under my protection. What followed was a display of coordinated resistance that would be studied by Starfleet Academy for decades. Rimuru used his matter manipulation abilities to create redundant life support systems independent of station power. The Jem'Hadar students, trained in close-quarters combat, established defensive perimeters. Romulan officers hacked Section 31's communication networks using techniques from their Tal Shir training. Klingon and Cardassians worked together, unprecedented cooperation, to manually seal bulkheads and create physical barriers against potential boarding actions. And throughout it all, Bajoran observers documented everything, ensuring that whatever happened next would be public record. 14 minutes after the ultimatum, Chief O'Brien restored manual control of critical systems. 16 minutes in, Great Sage completed her counter-intrusion and began tracing Section 31's network back to its source. At 28 minutes, Luther Sloan himself appeared on the view screen, his expression a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. Impressive, he said. You've successfully countered our technical attack and mobilized your students into a defensive force. You've also guaranteed that this incident becomes public knowledge, which means Section 31's concerns about your academy will now be validated in the eyes of Starfleet Command. Congratulations, Mr. Tempest. You've won the battle while ensuring you lose the war. Have I? Rimuru asked. Because from where I'm standing, you just proved my entire thesis. You attempted to use fear and violence to prevent education because you're terrified of what informed, connected, cooperative people might accomplish. You've demonstrated exactly why institutions like this academy are necessary, because shadow operatives would rather murder students than risk them learning to think critically. Sloane's expression didn't change. You're naive. Those students aren't united by principle, they're united by shared threat. The moment you remove the external pressure, they'll revert to their traditional antagonisms. Prove it, Kidnaklan said, stepping forward. I am Jem'Hadar. Genetically designed to serve founders without question. Yet I choose to question. I choose to learn. Section 31's attack did not create that choice, it simply revealed it. You fear us not because we are controlled by Rimuru Tempest, but because we are learning to control ourselves. Other students voiced similar sentiments, Cardassians who'd chosen accountability over pride, Romulans who'd chosen transparency over secrecy, Klingon who'd chosen cooperation over individual glory. Sloane listened to all of it with inscrutable calm. Finally, he spoke directly to Rimuru. You're creating something dangerous. Not immediately, not obviously. But in 10 years, 20 years, when these students hold positions of power in their respective governments, when they have networks that cross traditional boundaries, when they owe loyalty to ideals rather than nations, that's when the real threat emerges. And by then, you'll be long gone, back in your own dimension, unable to control what you've unleashed. Good, Rimuru said simply. That's exactly the point. I don't want control. I want transformation. And yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it could lead to unexpected consequences. 26 months after the Academy's founding, a Romulan diplomatic courier arrived at Deep Space Nine carrying news that sent ripples across both quadrants. The supernova that would eventually destroy Romulus had been detected decades ahead of schedule. The projections were catastrophic. 900 million Romulans faced extinction. The Free State government, already fractured by internal power struggles, descended into paralysis as competing factions debated evacuation strategies, resource allocation, and which worlds would be abandoned to save others. Commander Torith, now a general after her Academy participation had elevated her political standing, contacted Rimuru directly. We need your help, she said without preamble. Not consultation. Not teaching. Direct intervention. The Romulan people are facing extinction and we don't have decades to implement gradual reforms. Rimuru sat in his private quarters, the weight of the request settling over him like a physical force. Through the viewport, he could see the Academy's latest class in session, 120 students now, with waiting lists from a dozen species. In 2 years, they'd trained over 300 individuals who were now implementing frameworks in their home governments. Small successes. A Cardassian-Bajoran trade agreement that would have been impossible before. Dominion client species negotiating for greater autonomy using diplomatic tools learned at the Academy. Romulan reformists establishing transparent governance models in border colonies. But 900 million lives demanded more than gradual reform. Analysis requested, Great Sage said. Do we intervene? You know the answer, Rimuru thought back. You've already calculated the optimal response. Tell me what you found. Optimal response, refuse. Maintain commitment to teaching overdoing. Allow Romulans to solve crisis using frameworks learned at Academy, demonstrating capacity for self-directed action. This preserves the fundamental philosophy that motivated Academy creation. And the suboptimal response? Help them. Use matter manipulation and dimensional knowledge to accelerate evacuation efforts, rebuild colony infrastructure on safe worlds, prevent mass casualties. Success probability, 87.2%. Cost, complete abandonment of principles. Every civilization facing crisis will expect similar intervention. You become exactly what Q warned against. The eternal guardian who can never leave because your absence means catastrophe. Is there a third option? Query unclear. Please specify parameters for alternative approach. What if we did both? What if we helped, but in a way that requires them to transform while we do it? Not doing it for them, but making our help contingent on them doing the work themselves. Great Sage was silent for 3.7 seconds, an eternity for an analytical intelligence. Intriguing. Developing framework. Framework complete. Presenting options. Rimuru contacted General Torith back. I'll help. But there are conditions. Her expression was wary. What conditions? First, the Romulan government must establish a public, transparent evacuation council that includes representatives from all major factions. No secret Tal Shir operations, no classified backup plans, no hidden agendas. Every decision about who evacuates when and to where is made publicly and justified openly. Toritha's jaw tightened. That will trigger immediate political crisis. Conservative factions will never accept. Then conservative factions can evacuate using their own resources, Rimuru interrupted. I help those willing to work transparently. Everyone else handles their own evacuation. Second condition, evacuation destinations must accept Federation observers to verify that relocated Romulans aren't being used to establish covert military installations or espionage operations. You want my help rebuilding colonies? Fine. But those colonies won't become launching points for renewed aggression. You're asking us to surrender sovereignty. I'm asking you to prove you've learned something from 2 years at the Academy. That transparency builds trust. That cooperation requires verification. That the old ways of Romulan secrecy and manipulation are exactly what created the political paralysis preventing effective evacuation efforts right now. Torith was silent, her expression cycling through anger, frustration, and finally reluctant acceptance. And the third condition? Students from the Academy, Romulan and non-Romulan, form the core of the evacuation implementation teams. They apply what they've learned about multi-species cooperation, resource allocation, and crisis management. I provide technical support and emergency intervention when absolutely necessary, but they do the actual work. This becomes a demonstration of what Academy principals accomplish under real-world pressure. You're using our crisis as a teaching opportunity, Torith said flatly. I'm using your crisis as proof that what we've been teaching actually works, Rimuru corrected. General, you've been attending Academy sessions for 2 years. You've learned frameworks for exactly this kind of large-scale coordination. Now you need to implement them. Succeed, and you prove that Romulan reformation is viable. Fail, and at least you'll fail honestly, with the galaxy watching and understanding why. General Torith stared at him for a long moment. Finally, I'll present your conditions to the Provisional Council. But Rimuru, if they refuse, if political pride matters more than Romulan survival, will you really let 900 million people die to preserve your principles? No, Rimuru said quietly. If your government refuses, I'll help coordinate independent evacuation efforts for those willing to work outside official channels. Civilians, reformist factions, anyone who values survival over political posturing. But I won't enable governmental dysfunction by rewarding it with unconditional support. After the transmission ended, Kira entered his quarters without announcement, a privilege she'd earned over 2 years of friendship. You're really going to do this, she said. Insert yourself into Romulan internal politics at the most vulnerable moment in their history. I'm really going to teach them to save themselves, Rimuru corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Kira settled into a chair, her expression troubled. Rimuru, I've watched the Academy transform Deep Space Nine. I've seen enemies become colleagues, grudges dissolve into cooperation. It's been remarkable. But this is different. This isn't controlled classroom exercises. This is hundreds of millions of lives depending on frameworks designed by students who've never faced crisis at this scale. Which is exactly why it matters, Rimuru said. If the Academy only works under ideal conditions, it's just academic theory. But if it works during existential crisis, when stakes are highest and mistakes are measured in lives lost, that proves it's real. That proves transformation is possible even under the worst circumstances. And if they fail? Kira asked. If your students' frameworks collapse under pressure and people die because you refuse to just solve the problem yourself? Rimuru was quiet for a long time. Then I'll carry that weight for the rest of my life. I'll know that my commitment to principle cost lives I could have saved. But Kira, if I solve every crisis personally, if I make myself indispensable by being willing to do what others won't, I create a galaxy that can't function without me. And when I leave? And I will leave in 4 months, what happens then? 4 months, Kira repeated. Your time's almost up. Yes. Which means this is my last chance to prove the Academy model works. If I can help coordinate Romulan evacuation without taking over, if students can implement frameworks under crisis conditions and succeed, or even fail productively, learning from mistakes and adapting, that's the legacy I leave behind. Not Rimuru the savior, but Rimuru the teacher whose students proved they didn't need him. The Romulan Provisional Council accepted Rimuru's conditions after 3 days of heated debate. The vote was close, 7 in favor, 6 opposed, with 4 abstentions. But acceptance was enough. What followed was the most intensive implementation of Academy principles ever attempted. Evacuation Council meetings were broadcast publicly, an unprecedented transparency that shocked Romulan citizens and galvanized reformist movements. General Torith led the military coordination, working alongside former students from a dozen species. Kidna clan, now fully independent of White and serving as an informal ambassador for reformist Dominion factions, provided expertise in large-scale logistics. Cardassian engineers who'd learned resource optimization at the Academy designed evacuation schedules that maximized saved lives while minimizing resource waste. And everywhere, the framework held. Public decision-making, transparent resource allocation, accountability structures that prevented corruption or favoritism. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes were made. A transport convoy was delayed by bureaucratic confusion, forcing 6,000 Romulans to wait an additional week in dangerous territory. A colony site selected for relocation proved to have unstable seismic activity, requiring rapid redesignation that wasted precious time. But the frameworks allowed rapid error correction. Mistakes were identified, analyzed, and addressed publicly. Responsible parties acknowledged failures and implemented corrections. No cover-ups, no scapegoating, no hidden agendas. Rimuru provided technical support, using his matter manipulation to accelerate construction of evacuation facilities, analyzing spatial anomalies to identify safe transport routes, replicating critical supplies when shortages threatened operations. But he never took over. Never superseded the Evacuation Council's authority. Never made himself indispensable. 6 weeks into the evacuation efforts, Admiral Jean-Luc Picard arrived at Deep Space Nine. The legendary captain had been working independently on Romulan evacuation efforts, using his diplomatic credibility to secure Federation resources and coordinate with Starfleet. His arrival at the station was unexpected but not unwelcome. Rimuru met him in the wardroom, along with Kira and several senior Academy staff. Picard studied Rimuru with the intense curiosity of someone encountering a genuinely novel phenomenon. Mr. Tempest. I've been reading reports about your Academy for months. Admiral Ross speaks highly of what you've accomplished. But I confess, I came here with significant reservations. About my methods or my motives? Rimuru asked. Both, Picard said honestly. The Prime Directive exists because powerful beings have historically used their capabilities to reshape civilizations according to their values, even with good intentions. You've done exactly that, established an institution that teaches your philosophy to multiple governments simultaneously. From a certain perspective, that's cultural imperialism wrapped in educational rhetoric. And from another perspective? Rimuru prompted. From another perspective, you've created a framework that allows civilizations to transform themselves using principles rather than imposing solutions. You've taught rather than commanded, suggested rather than demanded, and most importantly, you've set a time limit. In 3 months, you leave. Whatever transformation occurs must be sustainable without your presence. Picard's expression softened slightly. That shows wisdom I rarely see in powerful entities. I had good teachers, Rimuru said. The prophets. Oddly enough. And people like Colonel Kira, who showed me what it means to maintain principle even when circumstances make compromise attractive. Picard turned to Kira. Colonel, I've read your reports on the Academy's impact on Bajoran-Cardassian relations. The trade agreements, the joint reconstruction efforts. Remarkable progress in just 2 years. Do you believe it will survive after Mr. Tempest's departure? Kira considered carefully. Some of it will. Some won't. The people who genuinely internalize the principles, like Ethka and General Torith and Kidna clan, they'll continue building. Others were here for strategic advantage or because their government sent them. When Rimuru leaves, those people will revert to traditional approaches. The question is whether the believers outnumber the opportunists. An honest assessment, Picard acknowledged. He turned back to Rimuru. I came here to offer assistance with the Romulan evacuation. I have resources, diplomatic connections, Starfleet support. I also came to witness firsthand whether your methods are as revolutionary as reported or as dangerous as some in Starfleet Command fear. What I've seen so far suggests both descriptions are accurate. I can live with that, Rimuru said. Over the following weeks, Picard worked alongside Academy staff, observing their methods and gradually becoming a participant rather than just an observer. He mediated disputes between evacuation council factions, negotiated with reluctant colony governors, and used his reputation to secure resources that bureaucratic channels couldn't provide. And in quiet moments, he spoke with Rimuru about philosophy, ethics, and the burden of power. You remind me of someone I knew, Picard said one evening as they watched the wormhole through the wardroom viewport. Data. An artificial being who struggled with what it meant to be sentient, to make choices, to grow beyond his programming. He spent his entire life becoming more than what he was created to be. I was human once, Rimuru said softly. Satoru Mikami, an ordinary man who lived an ordinary life and died saving someone else. Then I woke up as a slime in a cave, powerless and confused. Everything since then has been a process of becoming something I never expected. The power came gradually, almost accidentally. And with it came responsibility I never asked for. But you accepted it nonetheless, Picard observed. I tried to refuse. Tried to stay small, stay uninvolved, just survive in a strange world. Rimuru smiled sadly. Then I met goblins who were dying, and I couldn't walk away. Then dwarves who needed help, and I couldn't refuse. Each choice led to more responsibility, more people depending on me, until one day I realized I'd built a nation without ever intending to. And now you're trying to teach others to do the same without you, Picard said. To create transformation that doesn't depend on your presence. That's admirable, Rimuru. But it's also terrifying. Because once you teach someone to think independently, to question authority, to prioritize principle over politics, you can't control what they do with that knowledge. I know, Rimuru said. That's why it matters. Control is easy. Trust is hard. But only trust creates sustainable change. 93 days before Rimuru's planned departure, the Pah-Wraiths made their move. The attack came through the dimensional fractures that Rimuru's arrival had created, microscopic tears in spacetime that had been slowly, imperceptibly expanding over 2 years. The prophets had warned him about this. Q had hinted at it. But neither had specified when or how. Reality tore open in Bajoran space, and something ancient and malevolent emerged. The entity that called itself Coast Amojan, the most powerful of the Pah-Wraiths, manifested partially in normal space, its consciousness pressing against the dimensional barriers like a prisoner testing cell walls. It couldn't fully enter, not yet. But it could reach through, could influence, could corrupt. Possessions began on Bajorans. Videk speaking in tongues, prophesying doom and promising power to those who embraced chaos. Technology failures cascading across Federation space near the dimensional fractures. And worst of all, whispers in the minds of those with psychic sensitivity. Rimuru felt it immediately. A presence that recognized him, that understood what he was, that saw him as both threat and opportunity. The Tempest, Coast Emojan's voice echoed through dimensions. The one who opens doors. The one who breaks barriers. You have done our work without knowing. These fractures you created. They are our doorways. Help us widen them. Help us enter fully. We will give you what you most desire. A vision appeared, Rimuru's home dimension, Tempest Federation thriving, his friends and allies visible and real. A pathway home, clear and simple, requiring only that he expand the dimensional fractures just slightly more. You're lying, great sage said aloud. The pathway shown is energetically impossible. It would collapse immediately upon attempted traverse. This entity is attempting manipulation through false promise. Wise construct, Coast Emojan acknowledged. But the lie contains truth. We can provide knowledge of dimensional pathways. We have existed between realities for eons. Help us, and we help you. Refuse, and you remain trapped here while your Federation falls to threats you are not present to counter. Another vision, Tempest Federation under attack by demon lords who taken advantage of Rimuru's absence. His carefully built nation crumbling because its guardian wasn't there to protect it. Rimuru closed his eyes against the visions. Get out of my head. We are not in your head. We are in your fear. In your doubt. In your knowledge that playing teacher while your true responsibilities suffer is cowardice dressed as wisdom. The word struck painfully close to thoughts Rimuru had harbored privately. The guilt of spending 2 years here while his people faced unknown challenges. The fear that his absence had already caused irreparable damage. The worry that choosing to teach strangers had been selfishness disguised as altruism. Captain Picard, Rimuru said through gritted teeth, I need you to contact the prophets. Tell them the Pah-Wraiths are attempting infiltration through the dimensional fractures I created. Tell them. The prophets cannot help you, Coast Emojan interrupted. We exist outside their jurisdiction now, in the spaces between dimensions that you opened. They may guard their wormhole, but they cannot guard the 1,000 fractures your arrival created. Picard was already moving, his command presence taking over. Colonel Kira, contact Bajorans. We need Vedex who can perform the rite of exorcism. Odo, lock down the station, I want every person accounted for and monitored for signs of possession. Chief O'Brien, can you detect these dimensional fractures? Already scanning, O'Brien replied from Ops. There are hundreds of them, Captain. Microscopic, but growing. At current rate of expansion, they'll be large enough for physical transit in 72 hours. 72 hours until Pah-Wraiths could enter normal space fully. Rimuru felt the weight of catastrophic failure settling over him. He'd come here to learn, to teach, to transform civilizations through education. Instead, he'd created doorways for entities of malevolent chaos. His presence, his very arrival, had endangered 2 quadrants. This is my fault, he said quietly. I need to seal the fractures. Warning, sealing dimensional fractures will require 95% of available energy reserves, Great Sage reported. Success probability, 67.8%. Failure could result in complete power depletion, consciousness fragmentation, or permanent dimensional anchoring to this reality. Return home would become impossible. The choice crystallized with terrible clarity. Seal the fractures and potentially trap himself here forever, or preserve his power to eventually go home while allowing Pah-Wraiths to enter. Choose, Coast Emojan whispered. Your students, your principles, your adopted quadrant, or your home, your people, your true purpose. You cannot save both. This is the balance the prophets spoke of. What do you value more? Rimuru opened his eyes and looked around Ops. Kira, coordinating defensive measures. Odo, protecting the station. Picard, lending his experience and authority. O'Brien, fighting technical challenges with characteristic determination. Dax, analyzing the threat with centuries of wisdom. And beyond them, the Academy students. Kidna clan, who'd chosen freedom over genetic slavery. General Torith, who'd chosen transparency over secrecy. Ethka, who'd chosen accountability over pride. Hundreds more who'd embraced transformation because they believed change was possible. He thought of Tempest Federation, his friends there, his responsibilities. The nation he'd built through blood and sacrifice. The people who depended on him. And he thought of what he'd learned over 2 years of teaching, that sustainable change came from within, not from external guardians. That trust mattered more than control. That making yourself obsolete was the highest form of leadership. Great Sage, he said quietly. Begin fracture sealing protocols. All available power. If this traps me here permanently, so be it. Acknowledged. Commencing dimensional stabilization sequence. Picard moved closer. Rimuru, you're risking your only path home. There must be alternatives. There aren't, Rimuru said. I created these fractures. I'm responsible for sealing them. That's what I've been teaching for 2 years, accountability, taking responsibility for consequences even when it costs you everything. If I don't live those principles now, when it actually matters, then everything I've taught was empty rhetoric. He began to glow, blue energy radiating from his body as Great Sage channeled every available resource into dimensional manipulation. The fractures throughout nearby space began to close, reality knitting itself back together through sheer force of directed will. Coast Amojan screamed, a sound that echoed across dimensions, rage and frustration at being denied entry. You fool! You sacrifice everything for beings who are not your people. For a universe not your own. This is not nobility. This is waste. Maybe, Rimuru gasped, the strain of sealing hundreds of fractures simultaneously pushing him to his limits. But it's my choice. My waste. And I can live with it. The Academy students, watching from the habitat ring, saw their teacher pouring himself into protecting a reality that wasn't his home. Kidna clan dropped to one knee in salute. Torith placed hand over heart in Romulan acknowledgement of worthy sacrifice. Even the skeptics, the ones who'd attended Academy for strategic advantage, felt something shift in their understanding. This was what leadership looked like. Not power wielded for personal gain, but power spent for others' protection. The fractures sealed, one after another, reality stabilizing as dimensional barriers reformed. Coast Emojan's presence faded, pushed back into imprisonment, its doorways closed. And Rimuru collapsed, his energy reserves at 4.7%, his consciousness flickering. Rimuru woke 3 days later in Deep Space Nine's infirmary, his consciousness slowly reassembling from the fragments that sealing the dimensional fractures had scattered across subspace. Dr. Bashir hovered nearby, monitoring readouts that made no biological sense but at least confirmed his patient was stabilizing. Welcome back, Bashir said with genuine relief. You've been unconscious for 72 hours. Colonel Kira has been checking on you every 4 hours, Captain Picard visited twice, and there's currently a line of Academy students outside who insist on seeing you the moment you're awake. Rimuru sat up slowly, feeling the hollowness where his vast energy reserves had been. Great Sage's analysis scrolled through his consciousness, 4.9% power remaining, regeneration protocols active but slow, dimensional sensitivity reduced by 78%, probability of locating return pathway now 1.8%. He'd trapped himself here. Possibly permanently. How bad is it? He asked quietly. Physically. You're stable. Energetically. Bashir gestured to incomprehensible sensor readings. I have no framework for understanding what you did, but whatever reserves you drew upon are severely depleted. Chief O'Brien has been analyzing the dimensional fractures you sealed, all 643 of them. He estimates the energy expenditure as equivalent to sustaining maximum warp for a Galaxy-class starship for 17 years. You did it in 3 hours. Correction, Great Sage interjected, her voice noticeably weaker than normal. 2 hours, 47 minutes, 18 seconds. Precision matters in these calculations. Are you alright? Rimuru asked her silently. Functional capacity reduced to 34%. Analytical processing slower than optimal. However, core systems intact. We will recover, though it will take time. Significantly more time than returning home would have taken. The weight of that reality settled over him. He'd saved this universe from Pah-Wraith infiltration, but he'd likely sacrificed his way back to Tempest Federation. His people would face their challenges without him. His nation would evolve, or collapse, based on the systems he'd built, not on his continued presence. Exactly what he'd been teaching for 2 years. Let them in, Rimuru told Bashir. The students. They deserve to know what happened. They filed in. Not all 120 current students, but representatives from each faction. Kidna clan, whose white free physiology had continued adapting. General Toreth, who'd returned briefly from Romulan evacuation coordination. Ethka, now serving as cultural liaison between Cardassia and Bajorans. A Starfleet lieutenant named Zhvairi. A Klingon warrior named Tar. A Vorta administrator called Eris who'd begun questioning founder directives. They gathered around his bio-bed with expressions ranging from concern to fierce pride. You nearly died sealing the fractures, Kidna clan said without preamble. The prophets confirmed it. If you'd attempted to preserve power for your journey home, the Pah-Wraiths would have entered this reality. You chose us over your own people. I chose accountability, Rimuru corrected. My arrival created those fractures. My responsibility to seal them. That's what I've been teaching. That power means accepting consequences, not avoiding them. You taught us more than that, Toreth said. Her usual Romulan reserve had cracked, revealing something approaching emotion. You taught us that principles matter more than survival. That integrity has value beyond strategic advantage. 2 years ago, I would have calculated that sacrificing strangers to preserve personal advantage was logical. Now I understand why you'd make the opposite choice. Ethka stepped forward, holding a data PADD. The Academy Council, students, not instructors, took a vote. We want to establish the Tempest Institute as a permanent institution after you leave. Not to replace you, but to continue the work. Teaching frameworks for multi-species cooperation, conflict resolution, ethical decision-making under pressure. We'd like your permission to use your name. Rimuru felt tears threatening. You don't need my permission. This was always meant to become yours. But yes, you have it. And my blessing. There's more, Zhvairi said, the Andorian's antennae twitching with excitement. Starfleet Academy wants to incorporate elements of your curriculum into officer training. The Klingon High Council is establishing a similar program for diplomatic corps development. Even the Dominion, what's left of the progressive factions, is requesting instructors trained in your methods. The ideas are spreading, Tar rumbled. What you planted is growing. Even without you to water it. That was the goal, Rimuru reminded himself. Create transformation that could survive without him. Teach principles that others could implement independently. Make himself obsolete. So why did success feel so much like loss? Colonel Kira visited that evening, after the students had departed and Bashir had finally agreed Rimuru was stable enough for extended conversation. The prophets want to speak with you, she said without preamble. They've been agitated since you sealed the fractures. The wormhole's been pulsing with unusual energy signatures. Videx on Bajoran's report visions, prophecies, messages that don't quite make sense. All of them about you. About what I lost, Rimuru said quietly. About what you chose. Kira settled into the chair beside his bed. Rimuru, I've been thinking about something you said 2 years ago, when you first arrived. You talked about being trapped between dimensions, about wanting to go home. I understood that intellectually, but I didn't really understand it emotionally. Now, watching you accept that you might never return to your people, I understand. And I'm sorry. Don't be. Rimuru managed a genuine smile. I made my choice with open eyes. No one forced me. The Pah-Wraiths offered me an alternative, let them through in exchange for knowledge about dimensional pathways. I refused because I've learned something over 2 years of teaching, shortcuts that compromise your principles aren't shortcuts. They're traps disguised as opportunities. The prophets called you here for this, Kira said with sudden certainty. The dimensional rift that brought you was an accident. They needed someone who'd experienced transformation, who understood nation building, who had the power to make a difference but the wisdom not to make himself indispensable. They needed you to teach us. And they needed you to seal those fractures when the Pah-Wraiths inevitably tried to exploit them. So I was a tool, Rimuru said without bitterness. A piece in their non-linear chess game. Or a teacher they recognized would have profound impact. Kira's expression softened. I've spent my life believing the prophets guide without controlling, influence without commanding. They brought you here because they knew what you'd choose to do, not because they forced you to do it. That's different from being manipulated. Is it? I think so. But I'm biased, I need to believe the prophets respect free will, or my entire faith collapses. Kira stood. Will you speak with them? They've been waiting. The runabout journey to the wormhole felt different this time. Rimuru was weaker, depleted, but somehow more present. More himself than he'd been in years, stripped of overwhelming power and forced to exist as simply Rimuru, not Rimuru the demon lord, not Rimuru the nation builder, just Rimuru. The wormhole opened as they approached, and the prophet's presence washed over him like a tide of nonlinear consciousness. The Rimuru chose, they said. The Tempest accepted cost. The storm protected rather than conquered. I failed, Rimuru said. I came here accidentally, I created fractures that nearly let your ancient enemies into this reality, and I trapped myself away from my home trying to fix my mistakes. That's not success, that's barely managed catastrophe. The Rimuru perceives linearly. Observed through non-linear awareness. Vision flooded his consciousness. He saw himself arrive through the wormhole 2 years ago. But now understood it wasn't accident. The prophets had detected dimensional instability in adjacent realities. They'd recognized that the Pah-Wraiths would exploit any vulnerability, would use any fracture to escape imprisonment. They needed someone from outside their reality, someone the Pah-Wraiths couldn't predict or control, someone who would make the necessary choice when the moment came. He saw alternate timelines. Ones where he'd refused to teach, where civilizations collapsed without frameworks for cooperation. Ones where he'd stayed permanently, where dependency replaced transformation. Ones where he'd accepted the Pah-Wraith's offer, where short-term success created long-term catastrophe. And he saw the timeline that was becoming reality, students implementing principles across 2 quadrants, slowly reshaping political dynamics through connection rather than conquest. Imperfect progress riddled with setbacks, but genuine evolution nonetheless. The Rimuru believes he failed. The prophets observe success. The temporal perspective determines interpretation. But I can't go home, Rimuru said, the words catching in his throat. I saved your reality and lost mine. My people. The Rimuru's people grow beyond dependence. Observe. Another vision, Tempest Federation facing crisis in Rimuru's absence. But instead of collapsing, the systems he'd established activated. Benimaru led military defense. Cheyenne coordinated civilian protection. Hakuru trained the next generation. The council governed, imperfectly but democratically. His nation didn't need him, it needed what he'd built, which was better. The Tempest Federation evolves. As the Rimuru intended. As all creators must allow their creations to do. The pain of separation is the cost of genuine legacy. That doesn't make it hurt less, Rimuru whispered. No. Pain persists. But meaning transcends pain. The Rimuru sacrificed return for principle. Chose integrity over convenience. Demonstrated that power without wisdom is meaningless. This is teaching that words cannot convey. Actions reveal truth. The prophets showed him one final vision, decades into the future, civilizations transformed by principles taught at the academy. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. Former enemies cooperating because students had learned frameworks for trust. Conflicts resolved through dialogue because frameworks existed. Progress happening because people believed transformation was possible. And in another dimension, Tempest Federation thriving without him, proving that what he'd built could survive his absence. The Rimuru created two legacies. Both flourish. Both validate the principles that motivated their creation. Success exists even in sacrifice. I miss them, Rimuru admitted. My friends. My people. The life I built there. Grief is appropriate. Loss is real. The prophets do not diminish pain. We observe that meaning can coexist with sorrow. The Rimuru made noble choice. Nobility does not erase cost. The prophet's presence began to withdraw, but a final message remained. The dimensional pathways are not completely closed. Probability low, but not zero. The Rimuru who taught patience, who demonstrated that sustainable change requires time, that Rimuru might discover what desperate searching cannot find. Sometimes the path home appears only to those who've accepted staying. And then they were gone, leaving Rimuru in the runabout with Kira piloting them back to Deep Space Nine. What did they show you? She asked softly. Hope, Rimuru said. Complicated, painful, uncertain hope. But hope nonetheless. 37 days later, Rimuru stood before the final Academy graduation ceremony. His time was up. 3 years, as promised. The Academy would continue under student administration, but his direct involvement ended today. 143 students graduated, representing 19 different species and 12 governments. They'd learned frameworks for cooperation, tools for conflict resolution, principles for ethical decision-making under pressure. What they did with that knowledge was up to them. Captain Picard delivered the keynote address, his words carrying the weight of decades commanding in deep space. You've been taught by someone extraordinary, not because of his power, though that is considerable, but because of his wisdom in restraining that power. Rimuru Tempest could have solved every problem you brought to him. He could have rebuilt worlds, mediated conflicts, imposed solutions that his capabilities made possible. Instead, he taught you to solve problems yourselves. He gave you frameworks rather than answers, principles rather than commands. That restraint, that faith in your capacity to grow, that's the real lesson. Remember it when you return to your governments and face pressure to abandon what you've learned here. After the ceremony, after the speeches and celebrations and tearful farewells, Rimuru stood alone in the now empty academy classroom. Furniture remained, but the energy that had filled this space for 3 years was dispersing. Students returning to their worlds, taking knowledge and relationships with them. He felt great sage's presence, still weakened but recovering slowly. Query, do you regret the choice? Sealing the fractures instead of preserving power for return journey? No. I made the right choice. I just wish the right choice didn't hurt so much. Acknowledged. For what it's worth, I calculate that we achieved 87.3% of optimal outcomes given the constraints. That is, satisfactory performance. High praise from you, Sage. I have become fond of this universe. Of the people we've taught. Of the changes we've witnessed. If we are trapped here permanently, there are worse fates. Odo entered the classroom, moving with his characteristic fluid grace. Everyone's looking for you, the changeling said. There's a farewell gathering at Quark's. Students, station personnel, even a few Starfleet admirals who came specifically to meet you before you depart. Depart to where? Rimuru asked with a sad smile. I don't have anywhere to go. The academy's closed, I've fulfilled my commitments, and I'm too weak to attempt dimensional travel even if I could locate a pathway. So stay here. Odo's tone was matter-of-fact. Deep Space Nine has always collected interesting refugees. You'd fit right in. As what? Station mascot? The powerless former teacher living in quarters and reminiscing about past glory? As a consultant? An advisor? A friend? Odo moved to the window, staring out at the wormhole. I spent most of my life alone, Rimuru. The only changeling among solids, never quite fitting anywhere. Then I found Deep Space Nine, and Kira, and something approximating belonging. This station specializes in making homes for those who don't fit elsewhere. If you'll let it, it could become yours too. Before Rimuru could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Wormhole opening, Nog's voice came through the comm. But the readings are wrong, this isn't normal Gamma Quadrant transit. The energy signature is. I've never seen anything like this. Rimuru and Odo rushed to Ops, arriving as the main viewscreen showed the wormhole behaving impossibly. Instead of its usual blue-white radiance, it pulsed with rainbow colors that shouldn't exist in normal spacetime. And emerging from its center was a small crystalline structure that looked hauntingly familiar. That's a dimensional anchor, Rimuru breathed. From my universe. I designed these for Tempest Federation's experimental spatial research. How did it get here? The answer came as the crystal transmitted a recorded message. Benimaru's voice, older, wearier, but unmistakably Rimuru's oldest friend and strongest subordinate. Lord Rimuru, if you're receiving this, it means our gambit worked. 2 years after you disappeared, we found records of your research into dimensional travel. We've spent decades developing technology to locate your energy signature across realities. This anchor is programmed to create a stable bridge between dimensions, but it requires a power source we don't possess, it requires you. If you're alive, if you're able, channel whatever energy you have left into the anchor. It will amplify and stabilize, creating a doorway home. We've waited 23 years for this. We'll wait as long as it takes. Come home, Rimuru. Tempest needs its founder. We need our friend. The message ended. Silence filled Ops as everyone processed the implications. Analysis, Great Sage said urgently. The anchor's design is sophisticated. Benimaru incorporated principles from our research but improved upon them significantly. If we channel our remaining energy, all 4.9%, there is 78.2% probability of creating stable dimensional bridge. However, it would drain us completely. Leave us powerless. And there's no guarantee the bridge would remain stable long enough for return journey. Correct. We would be gambling everything on probability. Failure means complete energy depletion in this universe with no path home. Success means abandoning everything we've built here. Kira stepped forward. Rimuru, that's your home. Your people. They've been searching for you for 23 years in their timeline. You can't. Can't what? Rimuru asked quietly. Can't go home. Can't abandon the relationships I've built here. Can't risk everything on an uncertain chance. You're right, I can't. But I also can't ignore this opportunity. He stared at the crystalline anchor, feeling its pull. Tempest Federation waiting. Benimaru, Cheyenne, Shuna, Hakuru, everyone he'd left behind, everyone he'd built a nation to protect. 23 years they'd searched. 23 years of loyalty and dedication and refusal to give up. And here, Deep Space Nine. Students scattered across 2 quadrants implementing frameworks he'd taught. Friendships with Kira, Odo, Dax, Picard. A universe he'd bled to protect from Pah-Wraith infiltration. The prophet said the path home appears only to those who've accepted staying, Rimuru said. I think I finally understand what they meant. This isn't about choosing between worlds. It's about accepting that belonging happens through connection, not location. I belong in Tempest Federation because I built it. I belong on Deep Space Nine because I learned to trust others to continue what I started. He turned to face the assembled crew. I'm going to attempt the bridge. But before I do, I need you all to promise something. If this works, if I make it home, don't let the Academy's work end. Don't let the connections we built dissolve. Keep teaching, keep connecting, keep proving that transformation is possible. Make my time here mean something beyond just a visiting teacher. You already have, Kira said fiercely. You've changed everything, Rimuru. You've shown us that power constrained by principle is stronger than power wielded without restraint. That legacy doesn't end when you leave. Picard stepped forward, extending his hand. It has been an honor, Mr. Tempest. You've taught an old captain new perspectives on leadership, sacrifice, and the true meaning of transformation. Wherever you end up, know that you've made a profound difference here. Rimuru shook his hand, then moved to the crystalline anchor that had been transported to Ops. He placed his hand on its surface, feeling the connection to home, to Tempest Federation, to everything he'd built and everyone he'd loved. Great Sage, he said aloud. Begin energy transfer. All remaining power. If this works, we're going home. If it doesn't. If it doesn't, we tried. And trying is sufficient. Initiating transfer in 3, 2, 1. Blue light exploded from Rimuru's body, channeling into the anchor, amplifying through crystalline matrices that Benimaru had designed with brilliant precision. The dimensional bridge began to form, a shimmering pathway between realities, unstable but growing stronger as more energy poured through. Rimuru felt his consciousness fragmenting again, power draining to nothing, but this time there was no fear. To this universe in sealing the fractures, and to his home universe in attempting return. The bridge stabilized. A doorway between dimensions, held open by the last dregs of power from a slime who'd become something far greater, sustained by the friendship and loyalty of people who'd refused to abandon their leader even after 23 years. Rimuru stepped toward the bridge, then paused, looking back at the crew of Deep Space Nine. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. For teaching me as much as I taught you. For showing me that belonging happens through connection, not power. For proving that transformation is possible when people choose to change. And then he stepped through the bridge, between dimensions, following the pathway home. The bridge collapsed behind him, the anchor's energy finally depleted. But before it vanished completely, a final message came through, Rimuru's voice, distant but clear. Keep building. Keep connecting. Keep transforming. The storm has passed, but what it watered will grow for generations. Live long and prosper, my friends. And remember, the greatest legacy is teaching others to continue without you. The wormhole returned to its normal configuration. The anchor crumbled to dust. And Deep Space Nine remained, forever changed by 3 years of learning from a teacher who'd proven that the highest form of power was knowing when to let go. In Tempest Federation, Rimuru materialized in the throne room he'd left 3 years ago, 23 years by their timeline. Benimaru caught him as he collapsed, energy completely depleted, but alive. Home. Welcome back, Lord Rimuru, Benimaru said, tears streaming down the Oni's face. We knew you'd find your way home eventually. We never stopped believing. And somewhere, across dimensions, in a classroom on Deep Space Nine that would continue teaching for decades, a holographic message activated, Rimuru's final lesson. Remember, the goal was never to build something perfect. The goal was to build something real. Something that could survive mistakes, adapt to challenges, and continue growing even after I left. You've done that. Now prove it by becoming something I never imagined. Surprise me. Exceed me. Make me obsolete. That's what I taught you. That's what I believe you'll achieve. The Tempest Academy's real legacy isn't what I built, it's what you'll build next. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories.